Hello everybody, and thank you all for coming. The intro to this video is going to be a little bit different. I want to explain to you what has been going on, since some of you likely saw a few weeks ago, we had a version of this uploaded before it suddenly went down. So, back on May 23rd of this year, we here at Fundy Fridays released the first half of this video covering Secretary of Education Linda McMahon. That video was up for a full 4 days without a single issue, before on the fourth day getting hit with 14 simultaneous manual copyright claims, one of which in particular blocked the video worldwide, taking it down for everyone on YouTube. And likewise, a tester version we uploaded with a significant amount of the copyrighted material removed was hit with 7 additional simultaneous manual copyright claims, bringing the total for this video to 21 manual claims, all from the WWE. Now, for reference, a manual copyright claim is different than an automated copyright claim at YouTube, which is where their software just picks up that copyrighted material has been used and immediately claims it. Instead, manual claims are submitted directly by the party making the claim, in this case, the WWE. And we generally know these claims to have been manual since the video sat for several uncontested days before being hit with the 14 original simultaneous ones. YouTube's robot just generally doesn't take that long. Now, as I said, this video was blocked through one of the claims. Most of the time, these copyright claims just result in revenue sharing. So essentially, WWE would get a portion, or in this case, likely all, of the ad revenue that we would normally get for this video. And while I'm sure the WWE would be more than happy to take our money and put it into their own pocket, I suspect that this goes a bit deeper. I suspect that some nerdy intern over at WWE's parent TKO company has been specifically tasked with finding and getting rid of as much McMahon-centered content as they can possibly find. Now, I won't pretend to have any hard, significant evidence of this claim, and truthfully, I might just be speaking out of my own deep bitterness. That being said, the fact that Stone Cold's iconic Austin 316 clip was claimed in the Linda McMahon episode while it is still allowed to exist in the fully monetized Hulk Hogan video, well, that leads me to believe that there are just some people the WWE is looking to protect, and some they are not, if you catch my drift. And the thing is, even without that claim that fully blocked the video worldwide, the WWE is aware that small creators like us over here at Fundy Fridays, we just generally don't have the resources available to us that allow us to accept having all of our ad revenue taken away, especially for a video with as much work and detail put into it as this one. Put simply, it is my belief that the WWE has used bogus copyright claims for perfectly fair use educational content, letting them take all of my ad revenue for my work, while also sending the message that they can absolutely just take the video down if they so choose, and all in the service of covering up their worst conduct from the past several decades. They tried to take money out of my pocket, food off of my table, and hell, as far as I'm concerned, the life-saving drugs out of my bloodstream, since I am still technically battling cancer, and the revenue from these videos absolutely pays for those treatments. But the thing is, these pricks don't know who they're dealing with either, because rather than just quietly giving up and passively participating in their cover-up efforts, instead, I sat down and recut all of my work. I went back through and replaced every single WWE copyright clip I could possibly find with just screenshots and my own commentary. I'll admit, that's not ideal and means that this isn't necessarily exactly the video I wanted to make. Because here at Fundy Fridays, we pride ourselves on utilizing real, first-hand, primary source clips whenever we can access them. And here, we just won't have a lot of those, at least until the second half of the video. Stay tuned. And likewise, it means that there will be longer stretches than usual of you just hearing my voice, which I like to break things up, but they didn't quite let me this time. That being said, though, in kind, I also went back through to make sure I added even more salacious detail about the WWE and Linda's conduct over the years because, well, I had the time, the motivation, and I'm a damn good storyteller. Hell, I even found a way to strip the copyrighted music out of Linda McMahon's old campaign ads, because you're not gonna get one over on me. And so, in the end, and with all of the concessions I've had to make, I do really hope and think that you all will enjoy my work here. If nothing else, I think this is a story of vital importance, both to my own home country of the United States, but honestly to the world at large in many regards as well. That's why I'm so passionate to tell this story. Even now, with the ever-present risk that the WWE will just comb back through my content again and try to find something new that they could possibly take this down for, or at least try to claim my revenue again. Even beyond all of that, I still feel this story needs to be told. The Secretary of Education is a position of immense power, and it's one that, as you will come to find out over the next couple of hours, Linda McMahon not only doesn't deserve, but is abjectly, abhorrently unqualified for. And so, telling this story is exactly what I'm going to do, whether or not Linda McMahon or anyone at the WWE likes it. Following this addendum I've made, the video will progress in its entirety as it was originally created. And unlike last time, this is not part one. This is the complete story of Linda McMahon, or at least as complete as I could possibly make it. I really hope that you take the time to stay and listen, and I think that those of you who do are in for one hell of a ride, because even beyond all of the important political implications, this is just a wild, wild ride of a story. So once again, following this addendum, the video will progress as it was originally intended to be presented, albeit with some new information and my edits and addendums. I even kept my original intro for posterity, so we've got an especially long intro for this video, but I feel like it's kind of worth it in this situation. And in the meantime, thank you so much for your time, your patience, and your viewership. Now please, enjoy the story of Education Secretary Linda McMahon.
WWF Linda McMahon.
Oh. What?
So she's now the Secretary of Education of the United States, which you might not know.
Wait.
I'm
So
dead
it went
serious.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another grapple-tastic episode of Fundy Fridays. If you're new around these parts, my wife, the Reverend Jen, and I, well, on this channel, we talk about things like American conservative politics, evangelical Christianity, pop culture, gay stuff, and the way all of those things seem to just bump into each other, like all of tonight's competitors in our 30-man main event Royal Rumble match. But also like children packed into an overcrowded, underfunded American preschool classroom who all deserve much better than to have their education be based on the property taxes of their neighbors. Weird dualities are going to kind of be a big theme for today. In all sincerity, folks, I could not be more fired up for tonight's episode if I tried, wherein we will be discussing the seedy life, sordid deeds, and scandalous endeavors of former World Wrestling Entertainment CEO and somehow current U.S. Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon. And folks, I truly believe that unlike Secretary McMahon, I am absolutely the right person for the job he's been given today. In my opinion, telling this story in a way that makes sense of the maddening absurdity that is a Secretary of Education Linda McMahon, well, it requires a very unique, dual-pronged set of interests, specifically in both modern American political history and in the complex and sordid history of WWE wrestling. And that is a combination of things I just so happen to specialize in. And I mean, interests like these, well, they're kind of like the nuclear keys you see in movies, right? You're supposed to have different people in control of them so that no one person can make the decision to drop the bomb. And here I am, like the mad scientist of this story, clutching both keys tightly in my sweaty palms and just rip-snorting eager to blow this whole thing wide open. Because the story of Linda McMahon is locked deep inside literal decades of professional wrestling lore. A tale of the most unethical business practices and shady dealings imaginable, cloaked cleverly but not cleverly enough in a facade of manufactured legitimacy and constant spin, funded by a nigh endless reservoir of personal wealth from which to pull from. The WWE and the McMahon family at its helm have, by all accounts, spent an unreasonable amount of time, money, and manpower highlighting Linda's positive attributes as a philanthropist and a boardroom executive, while also working to bury as much of her controversial, even disturbing past within the company as they possibly can, towards the overall goal of helping her achieve some position of political relevance. And while their efforts have been undeniably successful in many regards, the one thing they can't truly scrub away are the memories of a longtime follower of their company. I know just how sleazy and slimy Linda and her family were willing to get in order to beat their late 90s wrestling competition, and in fact, much of her worst I saw with my very own eyes as a young wrestling fan. Likewise though, for a casual observer of American politics, Linda's placement to the highly important and influential Secretary of Education position may not register as anything more than a uniquely entertaining example of Trump's overall political incompetence. He's dumb, he likes rich people, and so he picked another dumb rich person for the job. That's what he basically did the first time, right? And so there's no reason to think that history isn't just playing itself out again. Except no. See, Linda McMahon's placement to this highly sensitive and consequential role within our government was by no means the mere folly of some rich morons with too much luck and too little decency. Instead, Linda is the culmination of years of political cronyism and ultra-conservative tactical positioning. And it is my opinion that she was selected very carefully for this role and with a very specific and dark purpose in mind for it. One that could damage the American educational landscape for years to come, if not irreparably. And that's an opinion I feel more than ready to back up tonight. What started for me as a passion project about Hulk Hogan's MAGA makeover and its reflection of the tight link between modern American wrestling and modern American politics, it's now coming full circle with Linda's ascension to the top of the Department of Education. And now I think it's high time we not only explore that idea again, but also to bring it to its full, inevitable, and terrifying conclusion. Because unlike Hulk Hogan, who truly at this point is just a sad shill for the Trump campaign and little more than that, Linda McMahon actually has very real, very concerning, and very destructive power at her fingertips. And while cancer and chemotherapy may have taken the wind out of me over the past couple of months, I want you all to know that I'm fighting back, I'm getting better, and I'm responding well to treatment. My tumors have shrunk, and I don't have to go in for another CT scan for 2 months. But I've seen my destiny, this episode, standing on the horizon for a while now. In fact, the way I see it, I've spent over 4 months now getting myself back in shape for the biggest match of my career. I knocked off the rust with a couple of political think pieces, got a real warm-up in squashing that politically pugnacious, pillow-slinging punk-ass Mike Lindell, and now I'm ready for a real primetime main event match with a real effective conservative problem maker. So I say to the millions of Jennanites out there, please join me as I take you down what I believe to be one of the weirdest, wildest, and perhaps most consequential rabbit holes in all of Fundy Friday's history, as we piece together the puzzle of just what former WWE CEO Linda McMahon has in store for American education and literacy, and why she's even in this position at all. And just like any good main event fight, we're gonna get the commercial breaks out of the way early so the fight can proceed uninterrupted. And so with that in mind, let's take a moment to hear from our sponsor today, Helix Sleep. Hey everybody, this here is Stone Cold Steve Austin, and I'm taking a break from whooping ass to tell you a little bit more about Helix Sleep. 4th of July exclusive partner offer, 27% off site-wide. Visit helixsleep.com/fundyfridays or click the link in the description box. Now, you good folks know that Stone Cold Steve Austin spends most of his days handing out Stone Cold Stunners. And let me tell you, that does a number on your hips and on your back. But now that I've had my Twilight Luxe mattress for several months now, I'm throwing all of those sleep problems over the top rope like a bunch of sumbitches at the Royal Rumble. Can I get a hell yeah? These mattresses come shipped straight to your door. They're rolled up in the box like you put them in a sharpshooter. And they even offer free shipping inside the United States of America and especially to Texas, home of the Texas rattlesnake. Hell yeah! Stone Cold Steve Austin has enjoyed his Helix mattress for many months now and is getting the best nights of sleep he's ever had. Back in the day, I used to toss and turn on my old lumpy mattress and I'd wake up so sleepy I couldn't even fight a match on Sunday Night Heat. But now, with my Helix mattress, I'm ready for a main event at WrestleMania. Can I get a hell yeah? The Helix lineup offers 20 unique mattresses to choose from, and Helix even just launched a variety of mattress toppers as well. Helix mattress toppers are a great add-on even if you don't have a Helix mattress. Helix Sleep offers a sleep solution for everyone. And did you all know that in a Wesper sleep study, a super smart team of sleep science nerds, well, they tested people's sleep performance before and after switching to a Helix mattress. 82% of participants saw an increase in their deep sleep cycle. Participants, on average, achieved 25 more deep sleep minutes per night. And participants, on average, also achieved 39 more minutes of overall sleep at night. And Helix even has their convenient online sleep quiz. Nothing invasive, they just ask you questions about your body type, your sleep preferences, whether you're a heel or a face, to try and make sure that they find you the best mattress that you can get. Now, Stone Cold Steve Austin used the Helix sleep quiz to get paired with the Twilight Luxe mattress because he's thick and because he's a side sleeper, and also maybe because he's bald, but I'm not sure if that was part of it. There's even a 100-night sleep trial so you can test the mattress out and ensure that you love it before you fully commit. And right now, all of you can take advantage of Helix Sleep's exclusive 4th of July partner offer, 27% off site-wide. Visit helixsleep.com/fundyfridays or click the link in the description box. And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so. So, Linda Marie Edwards was born on October 4th of 1948 in New Bern, North Carolina, and specifically to parents Evelyn and Henry Edwards. By all accounts, her young life in North Carolina was generally pretty pleasant, functional, and without any real significant issues. The kind of upbringing we rarely get to talk about here on Fundy Fridays. Linda was the only child of a comfortable middle-class family. Not wealthy, but comfortable. She was a self-identified tomboy who loved playing sports with the neighborhood boys, and who would return to a loving and supportive household when said activities were over.
When Linda was growing up, she grew up in a home where there was lots of love and happiness and laughter. Our family was never wealthy, except in love. And so far as the material things of life, we were an average family. We had what we needed, we were very secure, very comfortable, but never really wealthy when it come to money. We were always very considerate of each other's feelings and wanted to remain close. I think that in itself makes a very happy family.
Reportedly, Linda's family were devout Baptists when she was growing up, but she seems to have converted to Roman Catholicism at some point during adulthood, though the exact circumstances around that conversion don't seem to be publicly available, at least as far as I was able to find. The only confirmations of her Catholicism that I could find at all, at least beyond third-hand articles and such, were a trio of Facebook posts, literally posted on Christmas and Easter specifically, and referencing vague Bible verses about I don't know who cares. And this article here seems to be the most direct source I was able to find, indicating that the information about Linda's conversion came directly from a campaign spokesperson from her 2010 Senate run, which we will get to later on. But we do at least have several reports about Linda's participation in her Baptist church choir, particularly around 1960 or so, since this is where Linda would first end up meeting a friend by the name of Vinnie Lupton, who himself is an absolute centerpiece of Linda's life story. See, Vinnie didn't grow up under the same kind of idyllic circumstances that Linda did.
Most people think, I was born with a silver spoon. Wish that were the case.
Growing up in near poverty in a trailer park, his mother remarries 4 times. As a child, McMahon witnesses beatings she endures from some of her husbands. He is often beaten himself when he defends his mother, sometimes with workman's tools.
I grew up in a very aggressive environment, to say the least. That includes, any number of individuals, stepfathers beating the hell out of me, only because I had a big mouth and had to say what was on my mind.
Through these beatings, young McMahon develops a philosophy that he says still serves him well in life.
If I lived through the ordeal, if I lived through the beating, then I won. So I really took that as a child.
Which in turn saw young Vinnie find solace from the chaos in a reckless young life of auto theft, illegal moonshine transportation, and spontaneous fistfights with drunken Marines. Eventually, Vinnie acted with such ruthless aggression that after one particularly violent street fight, he was arrested and given the option of either going to a state reform school or military school. And Vinnie chose the latter of those options, attending Fishburne Military Academy in Virginia, where he would behave so badly that he would become the first cadet in the school's entire history to be court-martialed for it. Unsuccessfully, mind you, but still, this place has been in operation since 1879, so how bad do you have to be?
I was the first cadet in the history of the school to be court-martialed.
He's accused of planning an impromptu trousers dropping on graduation day, a charge he vehemently denies.
It also seems to be around this time in his life where Vinnie would start going by the more mature moniker of Vince, and would give up his abusive stepfather's surname of Lupton for that of his biological father, Vince McMahon Sr., which is a piece of information I was able to ironically double-check by way of an eBay listing for one of his old yearbooks, which I think is just particularly interesting. But as fate would have it, Vince's mother and Linda's mother would both end up working at this point at the same Cherry Point military base in North Carolina, along with attending the same nearby Baptist church. And that's how these two WWE superstar-crossed lovers would end up in the same church building at the same time in 1961 during one of Vince's breaks from military school.
I sat down in the pew and, and immediately saw these beautiful blue eyes. And it was like, wow. And then, the choir stands up, to sing. And then I saw this statuesque, relatively buxom young lady, and I said, yeah, okay, now we've got some promise here.
Linda, at the time around 13 years old, reports that she was instantly smitten with the handsome 16-year-old boy that had just walked into her choir practice.
I met my husband, Vince McMahon, as I was singing in the choir of Battleground Park Baptist Church. He walked in, I thought he was kind of cute. And I was 13, he was 16. And if truth be told, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the sermon that day.
Vince, in turn, though, seems to have fallen in love more with Linda's family, or more specifically, their middle-class home, their generally loving nature, and overall lack of violent outbursts. And after becoming friends with Linda, Vince would reportedly spend basically every waking moment away from military school at the family's home. And while I'm not really convinced that he ever saw a beloved wife and companion in Linda, he certainly did see her as a way out of the trailer park, at least. Which is something we can learn a little bit more about in a 1999 interview that Vince conducted with Cigar Aficionado magazine. Why don't we go ahead and take a look now, shall we? Several years earlier, at 16, McMahon had met a 13-year-old named Linda Edwards, falling in love instantly. with her parents, Henry and Evelyn, that is. I had no idea what a family was until I met Linda and I saw how they lived. It was an Ozzie and Harriet life. There wasn't screaming and beating. You see, I thought, there's something else. I wanted some of that stability and love. And then I wanted more of it. McMahon married Linda after his sophomore year of college on August 6th of 1966. McMahon's father wasn't pleased with the choice, but as usual, the son took action his way. My dad thought if I got married, it would stop me from graduating, says McMahon. I knew that marrying Linda would ensure that I'd graduate. Linda's a whiz. She's more structured, she's more disciplined. All I'd learned from military school about discipline was how to get around it. So yeah, Linda wanted a boyfriend to love, while Vince wanted surrogate parents and a roommate for college. Classically American romance if I've ever heard one.
You know, I like hanging out with you guys. Well, not you guys, but the stuff you guys have is great.
Also, yes, I do own the original copy of this Cigar Aficionado. Shout out to the Mid-Missouri estate sale where I was able to find this. And yet, I also want to compliment Cigar Aficionado as a publication for having, I kid you not, the single most detailed, comprehensive, and organized digital archive of any publication I've ever seen. Seriously, it made screenshotting all this a lot easier than taking pictures of my magazine with my phone. And not even to mention that Cigar Aficionado is one of the most comprehensive and useful sources we have to talk about Vince and Linda's young life at all. Although it is still a cigar-based publication, we have to remember, leading to some rather interesting detours throughout the story. Let's continue with that last paragraph, shall we? East Carolina was also the place where McMahon learned to smoke cigars. 4 or 5 times a semester, whether he was hanging around the dorms or hitting the local pubs, McMahon and his buddies would smoke a few cigars and, as he puts it, do things college-age men do, he says, adding, I really like 'em most after a big meal. I love steak, but when you're in college, you do what you do, so back then it was more having a hamburger and later a cigar. Or what about this passage? The women, however, generally don't like the smell of McMahon's beloved smokes, particularly the Davidoff Double R. That's about all I smoke, he says. I like one thing and then I stick with it.
Smoke.
Instead, McMahon's favorite cigar smoking venue is his 4-car garage, one where parking space sits empty. No chairs adorn this area. It's just an austere slab of concrete where McMahon, Shane, and the other men of the McMahon clan can stand, smoke cigars, talk, slap each other on the back, and for once in McMahon's life, chill out.
Smoke.
Cigars are definitely a bit of a men's club moment for me, a real male bonding situation. We're always standing in that garage. I like it that way. I'm not one to sit on my ass a lot. I like to stand. I like to move around. Maybe some of the guys will sit on the steps or on the hood of a car, but me, I can stand and see who's coming. It's fun to dip a cigar in a little VSOP. I sip a little brandy, and with a cigar in one hand and a drink in the other, surrounded by good people, I'm able to relax, which is very difficult for me.
Are you smoking yet?
Now, I want to highlight up front that a lot of you may be thinking, gee, this Linda McMahon episode James is doing seems to have a lot more information about Vince McMahon than I might have expected. And I certainly don't want to participate in the age-old tradition of overshadowing the story of an influential, albeit terrible woman with that of her husband, who is also terrible. But quite frankly, these two individuals really cannot be separated from each other at all. As we'll see, their legacies fully intertwined early, like as in when they were teenagers, and haven't really untwined themselves since. Over the course of no less than 4 decades of marriage, these two built together a life, a family, a TV empire worth over $1 billion, an undeniable presence in American politics, and the rightfully messy reputation that those kinds of things tend to bring along with them. As we'll come to find out, while Linda has been trying to escape Vince's long, dark shadow for decades now, that's just not really possible in this situation. So with that in mind, be prepared for Vince to be a central part of our story today. Anyway though, while Vince may not have necessarily had the most romantic intentions with Linda, subsequent events in the story prove just how correct he was about her capabilities and her potential for success. Vince would go on to graduate from East Carolina University in 1968 with a degree in business administration, while Linda herself would graduate from the same college right around the same time with a degree in French.
Sacre bleu, where is me mama?
And from there, the couple would relocate themselves to Maryland. Linda would spend her first year out of college working as a paralegal for influential American law firm Covington and Burling, specifically noting that she worked on several cases involving intellectual property rights during that time, experience she will most definitely be tapping into later on in our story. Oh, and fun fact, but Covington and Burling is literally in the middle of a lawsuit with the Trump administration right now after being targeted by a recent round of executive orders, and which in and of itself is part of a massive multi-firm legal battle against these attacks from the president. Not super relevant for today's story, but weird nonetheless. Now, Linda's time in the workplace at this point would be pretty short-lived though, as she would end up giving birth to the couple's first child, their son Shane, in 1970, and would subsequently leave Covington and Burling for a turn as a full-time homemaker, while also supporting her husband's many business endeavors. And what kind of business endeavors, you might ask? Well, for more information about that, let's move on to the next chapter of our story. See, Vince's real dream was in fact to follow in the footsteps of his biological father, Vince Sr., or Vincent for the purposes of today's story, and to become a successful wrestling promoter. Now, technically, Vince actually wanted to wrestle, but Vincent absolutely forbade his son from mingling with the talent in that way. Vincent did end up relenting a bit, though, in 1969. Giving young Vince the opportunity to do manual labor and grunt work for his WWWF wrestling promotion, that's the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, alongside a TV role as an interviewer and commentator, though importantly, not as an actual wrestler. And bear in mind, Vince was initially doing this on the side in addition to other full-time employment. So we can only imagine the amount of labor that Linda was putting in behind the scenes to keep the young family's home life afloat. From there, though, Vincent would actually end up giving the couple their first independent opportunity at wrestling promotion in 1971, assigning Vince to promote his failing WWWF territory in Bangor, Maine. And in turn, Vince, along with his wife and young son, would relocate to the state of Connecticut, where by all accounts they remain to this day. And by all reports at least, Vince worked hard to promote and reestablish the Bangor territory, turning around something that had been completely unprofitable to something that could at least break even at the end of the night, while also increasing the company's usage of closed-circuit pay-per-view TV as a means of more widely broadcasting the family's wrestling product. But at the same time, neither he nor Linda appeared to be satisfied with just wrestling promotion, and the couple looked for opportunities to make their own fortune. And for the most part, these opportunities they found seemed to generally end in financial disaster. For example, there was the couple's failed attempt to move into the construction and cinder block business.
The bankruptcy came as a result of our taking some few dollars that we had saved early on and investing in a couple of businesses that we didn't know anything about. Primarily was a construction company and a cement block company, all of which was to feed the construction company. That was a very iffy business at the time, not one that we knew, so we didn't really know the safeguards to really look for. We were relying on someone else whose opinion we respected at the time for those kinds of investments, and they just didn't work.
Now, to be fair, I'm sure that this reasonable attempt at what seemed like a sound financial investment did probably contribute a lot to the young couple's financial concerns, as Linda mentioned. But also, to be fair, so did the massive debts they accrued from more dubious financial ventures, like financing Evel Knievel's attempt to jump the Snake River Canyon on a rocket cycle, or the bizarre cross-promotional fight between Japanese pro wrestling legend Antonio Inoki and American boxing legend Muhammad Ali, which apparently generated pretty good ticket sales and interest from spectators, while also losing a ton of money for the McMahon somehow, and which is now generally regarded as a train wreck of an event, in no small part due to the fact that Vince himself apparently told Muhammad Ali that the fight would be predetermined like a professional wrestling fight, without bothering to tell that to Inoki's team, who thought the fight would be a legitimate unscripted fight. And either way, by 1976, the McMahons had gone fully bankrupt off of the back of these piss-poor financial investments. Vince would end up working overtime at a nearby rock quarry just to make ends meet, while Linda stayed home and took care of the couple's newborn daughter, Stephanie. And at one point, the household even ended up on food stamps. And all the while, Vince continued to work for his father's promotion on the side. Yet, because these two spunky young adults came up in the kind of booming American economy that we can only dream of today, they were able to land on their feet relatively quickly after otherwise experiencing financial ruin. And by land on their feet, I mean that with just some regular hard work, Linda and Vince went from bankruptcy in 1976 to the purchase of a full-sized sports arena by 1979. I mean, nowadays, most of my friends can't afford a house even with great credit, but back in the day, financially irresponsible boomers could just pick up whole arenas on the cheap. But yes, by 1979, the couple had worked out a deal with owner Ed Fruin to just quietly take over the mortgage for the Cape Cod Coliseum, a sports and entertainment complex in South Yarmouth, Massachusetts. The couple generated reasonable revenue through a variety of concerts and athletic events. Everything from bringing in the rock band Heart to the Harlem Globetrotters, to even their very own minor league hockey team, the Cape Cod Buccaneers. And when I say their very own, I mean, yes, they actually owned the hockey team. And while Vince was certainly the face of the whole operation, Linda was right there with him behind the scenes every step of the way, working hard to keep the dream alive. Famously making meatball sandwiches even to sell to spectators during Buccaneers hockey games to make a little extra cash on the side. During this time, Linda also continued to pour herself into Vince's pursuit of success in the wrestling industry. The couple worked like mad to promote wrestling events at the arena as well, while also making the 6-hour pilgrimage every month down to Allentown, Pennsylvania, to continue his announcing and wrestling duties for his father. Reportedly, with the couple's 2 young children just fending for themselves a lot of the time. As we can see in this quote from the book Sex, Lies, and Headlocks by authors Mike Mooneyham and Sean Assail. Through the next couple of years, Vinny ran the Coliseum while taking time out every 3 weeks to tend to his announcing duties on his father's program, All-Star Wrestling. He shuttled from Cape Cod to Allentown, Pennsylvania, where the show was filmed at a small theater on the town fairgrounds. Their parents' schedule was taxing on the kids. As Stephanie would later remember, my parents weren't around until later at night, so for the most part, Shane raised me. He not only toughened me up, but he kept me thoroughly entertained, most of the time doing impressions of our dad. But it must be said that all of the couple's efforts did have what seemed to be a clear end game, namely Vince's eventual takeover of his father's wrestling company. By 1979, the transition had already begun when Vince convinced his father Vincent to change the name of the promotion from the Worldwide Wrestling Federation to the World Wrestling Federation, eliminating one of the W's and becoming the WWF. Likewise, in 1980, Vince and Linda co-founded the Titan Sports Company out of their Coliseum. And in 1982, would take out several bank loans to purchase Vincent's Capital Wrestling Company, in the wake of his own declining health and old age. And from there, the two set about changing the wrestling business entirely throughout the 1980s, which we'll explore in our next chapter. So, how did these two scrappy entrepreneurs end up reshaping the entire world of pro wrestling as we know it today? Well, for one, and perhaps most importantly, they almost immediately discarded the respect that Vince's father had maintained for the old wrestling territory boundaries, sneakily buying up other promotions and signing away their talent as a means to choke out the competition while also simultaneously expanding their own reach and capabilities. Likewise, they built on Vince's pre-existing plan to pursue a bigger TV audience, moving from closed-circuit regional broadcasts to national broadcasts in this time frame. And in turn, they pioneered the concept of promoting wrestlers and storylines with much broader appeal. And by 1984, Vince and Linda had developed what was the first ever truly nationally televised wrestling product, built upon the talent and hard work of a host of professional wrestlers, most prominently Hulk Hogan. Although if you want that story, you can check out my other long-ass video about that. But it's really important for us to note here that while at least at this point, Vince was the public face of the company and far more famous than his wife, Linda was putting in just as much time and effort into building both Titan Sports and the WWF brand as Vince was, albeit from behind the scenes. For one thing, Linda's previous work at Covington and Burling had developed in her an acute interest in the merchandising side of professional wrestling, something Vince is notoriously disinterested in, and which ended up leading to a particularly revolutionary idea for the industry: the wrestling action figure. No, seriously, the wrestling figurine industry is massive nowadays, bringing in millions upon millions of dollars to the WWE every single year, and more broadly to the entire wrestling industry as a whole. And it all started with the Wrestling Superstars action figure set, released in 1984 through a deal with LJN Toys, which was personally negotiated by Linda.
Hulk Hogan and Big John Studd. And now you can fly 'em and flip 'em in the Sling 'em Wrestling Ring. Wrestling Superstars and New Wrestling Ring, each sold separately from LJN.
Furthermore, most reports I found indicated that Linda primarily took the lead on negotiating all of the company's TV deals, including, most notably, the company's massive deal with Viacom, which admittedly wouldn't happen until 2000, but still is a testament to her business acumen. But just as Linda was responsible for some of the best innovations in modern wrestling, it seems just as likely that she may have also been responsible for one of the worst and most exploitative developments as well: an aggressive new approach to copyright and intellectual property law in regards to wrestling talent. And what I mean by that is, at least as far as I can tell, it seems like Linda was likely the first person to suggest trademarking wrestlers' ring names, likenesses, and personas during their time in the company, given her direct background in just that sort of thing. This highly controversial approach to labor not only gave the company a much larger cut of the wrestlers' overall take in things like merchandising and such, it also meant that the WWF could ban people from using the ring names and personas they had used while they were in the company should they ever decide to leave or switch promotions, effectively allowing them to take away a lot of the goodwill these wrestlers had built up with the audience during their time in the company, as well as just their general name recognition, and often forcing them to abandon the personas they were known for and worked hard to develop, and basically start over from square one. And that's actually something they're still doing today. That's why wrestler Adam Copeland, who first found success in the industry with the WWF while working under the ring name Edge, was forced to give that name up once he left the company, and why he now wrestles for their AEW competitor under the similar yet different moniker of Cope. And bear in mind, all of that is in addition to the fact that the WWF only works with and worked with wrestlers as independent contractors. Or independent contractors, I think I should say, avoiding pesky little business details like health insurance, pensions, and the like, while also famously maintaining far more control over their wrestlers' working lives and paychecks than should have been possible under an independent arrangement like that.
You were talking a little bit about unionizing the business. Do you think it's legal to classify WWE wrestlers as contractors?
No. I can't figure out how he gets away with the federal government. In fact, he's lucky I didn't become a U.S. Senator. I would have started a senatorial investigation over it.
Wow.
They are not independent contractors by any stretch of the imagination. My God, they tell you when you'll wrestle. They tell you who you'll wrestle. You can't wrestle for anyone else. An independent contractor, I should be able to wrestle for any organization I want. You're signed exclusively.
Right.
How the hell can they get away with that?
But Linda, by all accounts, was already pretty well acquainted with the shady side of pro wrestling by the 1980s, which we can see through her famous tip-off memo, a memo she wrote to then VP of WWF Pat Patterson, directing him to fire the company's steroid-supplying doctor at the time, Dr. George Zaharian, but also encouraging him to inform Zaharian of a pending federal investigation into his medical practices, which it appears he was not supposed to be aware was coming. But perhaps most important for today's story, this period in Linda's career is where she and the rest of the McMahon family would first enter the orbit of Donald Trump. Now, this relationship seems to have begun when the Trump Plaza in Atlantic City hosted WrestleMania 4 and 5 across 1988 and 1989, becoming the first ever venue to host back-to-back WrestleManias. Or rather, hosted might be the proper term here. Though Trump did sponsor the event, it was not actually held at the Plaza, but instead at the nearby Boardwalk Hotel. They just said it was at the Trump Plaza. One McMahonly event that actually was held on a Trump property, though, was the World Bodybuilding Federation Championship in 1991, which took place on Trump's Atlantic City Taj Mahal property. And here is perhaps my one and only chance to talk about the World Bodybuilding Federation here on Fundy Fridays. And even though I can't show you any footage from the WBF, since the WWE is copyright claiming all of it for reasons that will probably become obvious. So we're going to take a bit of a detour here. Look, it's not my fault that my massive interest in political discourse just so happened to recently crash land into my massive interest in obscure wrestling lore. But I'm still going to take advantage nonetheless, and may God have mercy on you all while I do. So anyway, medium story made much shorter. In 1990, Vince decided to try and do to the sport of bodybuilding what he had done to professional wrestling. Namely, to use big, flashy characters, high production values, and a national television show to bring in new fans and draw in a brand new source of revenue for Titan Sports. What resulted was a very strange and very brief moment in television history, with grown men in the skimpiest underwear, or sometimes just straight up fetish gear, strutting out on stage to music and pyro as such, but not to wrestle, or even talk or any of that, just to be muscle man and pose flexily. Now, as one might expect, this thing was pretty unpopular from the get-go, mostly because it's just the boring parts of pro wrestling. But after the promotion started trying to test for steroids in 1992, the jig was basically up entirely. Literally, only Vince McMahon could have thought this was a good idea. Mostly because I'm pretty sure he's the only person on Earth who likes man beef that much. Now, to be fair, I am far from the first person to ever mention Vince's particular fondness for big meaty men, and in fact, it's kind of a well-known thing amongst wrestling fans by now. But I might be the first person in history to draw a direct line between Vince's particular appreciation for big meaty men and how President Donald Trump picks his cabinet members. And I gotta say, that's something I'm proud of.
Big meaty man slapping meat.
But seriously, we've got to recognize that Trump and the McMahons are far more than just passing acquaintances. This is both a professional and personal relationship that spans back decades at this point. And honestly, the similarities between Trump and Vince, well, they just leap off the page to a certain degree. Both got fabulously wealthy by exploiting much better and more talented people than themselves, and both are exceptionally pervy and weird, while also inexplicably maintaining unreasonable control over the lives of thousands or millions of people. These two people aren't just renting arenas off each other, and hell, this is far from the last time we'll see Trump in this episode. Anyway though, I honestly feel like I've kind of lost sight of Linda at this point, who was supposed to be the star of the episode. Although that's something that's very easy to do with Linda McMahon. As far as I can tell, she's usually the most boring person in her own life. To be fair, a lot of that seems to be by design. Linda spent the first several years of her time working with the WWF in a strictly behind-the-scenes capacity after being formally named the CEO of the company in 1993. Invoking Vince's father, actually, and maintaining a strict wall between her and the actual wrestling side of things. The same could not be said for her husband, though. Vince had already spent years building an on-screen persona as an interviewer and a commentator, and as such generated basically all of the family's media and publicity up to that point. Furthermore, his role as an on-screen participant in the TV shows they ran would increase dramatically around 1997. See, as times changed, so too did the wrestling business. And competition started to arise from newer, edgier, more innovative national wrestling brands. Most notably, Ted Turner's WCW promotion, which you can also learn more about in the Hulk Hogan video. But all of which was starting to threaten WWF's status as the top dog of their industry. So, in an effort to really crank things up a notch, Vince and the WWF tore back the curtain and exposed the mystique of wrestling's mythic reality, or kayfabe as it's called, announcing to the whole world that the show was in fact predetermined, and opening themselves up to a ton of new storytelling possibilities in the aftermath, along with allowing them to dodge a bunch of taxes and fees associated with trying to operate an unscripted sporting product. But that's a story for another day. And in fact, these are screen caps from the legendary video announcement Vince made on television to tell everyone about the death of kayfabe. Another clip I'd love to show you if the WWE weren't a bunch of copyright-claiming cowards. Oh, by the way, my Hogan video also starts off with a really great primer, at least in my opinion, of some basic wrestling terminology, things like kayfabe, face, that means good guy, heel, that means bad guy. I go into a lot more detail in the Hogan video, so if you're interested in that stuff, check that out. But you should be able to get the gist of what I'm saying today even without it, and I'll try to explain any terms I use as I go. Just forgive me if I go fast. I'm an old wrestling fan, and a lot of this stuff just is kind of natural to me anymore. But basically overnight, a parade of new, more mature wrestlers and storylines flooded the WWF's programming, much to the delight of their fan base, who was kind of growing up alongside the product in a lot of regards. All of a sudden, everything from porn stars to sexy nihilistic young punks in all flavors of hot gender to mud wrestling bikini women to undead wizards to the pyrokinetic burn victim brothers of said undead wizards. Now it could all be seen in the wrestling ring. But the piece de resistance of this movement, the WWF's grand masterstroke in keeping up with the grungy, hardcore attitude of the 90s, was Vince's boldest new plan to boost the WWF's profile, namely positioning himself as the company's top heel, or bad guy. Under the guise of an evil billionaire boss character, which honestly was just Vince's own personality made a little bit more dramatic for TV, Vince would step onto his own show for the first time as a full-fledged storyline participant. He even finally got to experience the one thing his father had always told him to avoid: actual wrestling. Throughout the late 90s, Vince himself would feud on screen with a variety of the WWF's top stars, most notably Stone Cold Steve Austin, who by that time had already been well positioned as the company's newest top tough guy everyman megastar. And this is where I would play the famous Austin 3:16 clip, wherein Stone Cold famously tells religious opponent Jake the Snake Roberts that Austin 3:16 says, "I just whipped your ass." But, as we already mentioned, for some reason, the WWE decided to claim my usage of that clip in this episode, even though they let me use it in the Hulk Hogan clip. Weird, right? Anyway, though, it was legitimately brilliant. Stone Cold basically got to do to Vince every week on TV what all of the show's viewers wanted to do to their bosses every Monday. And in kind, Vince allowed himself to be beaten up and humiliated by Stone Cold all the way to the bank. It totally made sense. A gritty, ultra-violent retelling of the classic dumb rich guy gets beat up by cool regular guy trope that we all know and love, but specifically crafted for a nihilistic young Generation X audience. A fresh, edgy coat of paint on an otherwise timeless idea.
You might want to pay $5 or $10 or whatever it is to see that fight, to see whether the little guy can kick the shit out of the big guy and get even for you.
And yet it was far from just sexy sunshine and bloody roses at this point in the WWF's history. And things were about to get much weirder and more uncomfortable for everyone, something we will explore in our next chapter. So, as his competition in the wrestling business continued to up the ante throughout the late 90s, so too did Vince, increasing the blood, sex, and edge even further before eventually bringing his own family into the company's on-screen universe towards the turn of the millennium to really crank up the shock value. The couple's son Shane would debut on TV for the company in 1998, working storylines, doing a bit of actual wrestling, and even joining his father's group, or stable in the lingo, of on-screen lackeys, dubbed the Corporation. Likewise, daughter Stephanie debuted in April of 1999, specifically as a kidnapped damsel in distress as part of a long-running story arc between her father and The Undertaker, who in fact threatened on-screen to both forcibly marry and impregnate Stephanie, which is also a clip I'd love to show you if the WWE hadn't inexplicably copyright claimed it. And shortly after all that, Linda McMahon herself debuted on WWF television for the first time just 1 month later in May of 1999. But see, by then things were already off to a pretty salacious start. Because see, in kayfabe, in the storyline, it was actually her brother Shane who helped The Undertaker kidnap Stephanie in an effort to double-cross his father Vince and take over the Corporation stable for himself. Oh, and not to mention that the entire angle ended up just being a convoluted setup for Vince to screw over Stone Cold Steve Austin again, who, by the way, had tried to help rescue Stephanie from The Undertaker already at that point, while also allowing Vince to merge his Corporation stable with The Undertaker's Ministry of Darkness stable for some reason. I don't know, I was 9 and it doesn't really matter anyway. Because while Linda stepped off TV for a few months after this whole angle wrapped up, the rest of the storyline, along with the McMahon family's public image, only got more intense, more insane, and more indecent from there.
Stephanie, I asked your parents this about your role in the WWF and whether you played by different rules than Deborah Say, who obviously is portrayed in a certain way, a way that you've not been portrayed to date. Will you judge in your own mind and speak out if there's something that you want to do? Do you have your limitations as to what you do?
I haven't reached them yet.
But do you have in your mind something where you say, I'll only go too far, I'll only go this far?
Well, in terms of what?
Would you do what Deborah does?
Which is?
Puppies?
Well, as my father put, that I heard, I'm not quite as built as Deborah is, so...
But just, I mean, your character is nothing
They're
to do with
smaller
that.
puppies, that's all.
But thank you, you don't have to elaborate.
They're cute.
Thank you.
Oh, that wasn't a kayfabe storyline interview either. That was just Shane talking about his sister's breasts. And in fact, the on-screen product was somehow much worse. For context, in a storyline that played out in December of 1999, Linda's daughter Stephanie was drugged unconscious, kidnapped again, and somehow married against her will to wrestler Triple H at a drive-through Vegas wedding chapel, all as a mere plot point against her father with whom he was already feuding. Later that same month, though, Stephanie would betray her father and align with said husband-apper, and during a match where Vince was literally trying to defend her honor, no less. And in fact, these screen caps come from a segment where Stephanie told her own father, Vince, to bash her brains in with a sledgehammer because that would be what it would take for her to give up Triple H. And from there, the family would devolve further and further into abject on-screen debauchery and chaos throughout the next few months in 2000. Stephanie would help Triple H cheat his way to a WWF Championship victory in December 2000, specifically by beating and retiring fan favorite and wrestling legend Mick Foley in a particularly brutal hardcore match. Likewise, Shane would return to TV shortly after, working in storyline with wrestler The Big Show, to feud with his father Vince again, who had also recently returned and in storyline was working with The Rock. All of whom then started feuding with Triple H over his WWF title, while just being awful to each other the entire time. Like in the clip that these screen caps came from, where Shane tells an entire audience of people that his sister is dressing like a cheap slut, his words not mine, before she admittedly very reasonably slaps him in the face. Again, can't imagine why they would claim this. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get more completely egregious, Linda was once again reintroduced to the WWF television audience, this time again as a good guy or face, in order to introduce yet another wrestler to this giant feud, specifically bringing back the recently retired Mick Foley and leading to a monumental McMahon in every corner fatal four-way main event at that year's WrestleMania 2000. And while it may seem like a good thing for Linda's image that she was specifically brought back to be a good guy in this situation, I can assure you that the whole thing was far from wholesome for anyone. Something I would have shown you with clips, but of course they're not going to let me. So instead I'll just tell you that this feud involved Stephanie calling her mother a conniving bitch before slapping her on live television and in front of 20,000 fans, Linda slapping her daughter Stephanie on live television and also in front of 20,000 fans, and beloved announcer Jim Ross announcing to the crowd at one point that they were witnessing, quote-unquote, the complete destruction of television's most dysfunctional family. Yet it somehow devolved even further from there, moving into the back half of the year 2000, with Vince and his children aligning to form a new stable of, well, heel billionaire family member jerks. And in turn, Linda was left to try and act like the family's on-screen conscience of sorts, and received only cruelty and abuse for her trouble. Like in this segment they also won't let me show you, where Vince calls his own wife in front of everyone and again on live television a meddlesome, castrating shrew of a wife. And it somehow gets even worse moving into December of 2000, when Vince would go into plot territory so unholy, I'm surprised that God himself didn't turn the man into a pillar of salt in front of 20,000 screaming fans. And of course they're not going to let me show you this clip, so let me just describe to you how Vince, in front of a live audience, screamed "to hell with my family," told his wife he wanted a divorce, and then in a separate segment the following week informed his daughter that he also hated her while telling her a long meandering story about how Linda was a quote-unquote good time girl in high school. And following this whole divorce incident, Linda would, in storyline at least, fall ill over the heartbreak of her husband's awful treatment, ending in a nervous breakdown that would see her under Vince's power of attorney somehow, despite the fact that he essentially caused this nervous breakdown on live television. And from there, Vince took advantage of the situation by drugging Linda into catatonia, while also openly cavorting with much younger wrestler and fitness model Trish Stratus. Like, up to and including making out with Trish in front of an unresponsive Linda along with 20,000 live wrestling fans, before then, in a separate segment, violently attacking the couple's only son Shane and explaining that he would never forgive Linda for giving birth to Shane. Oh, and not to mention that later in this angle, Vince and Stephanie would attack Trish and pour dirty mop water all over her right in the middle of the ring as a humiliation tactic during a separate segment. And they would follow that up with a segment where Vince viciously forced Trish to crawl around on all fours with her top off and bark like a dog, all for the right to remain his mistress. And all because in storyline she made him mad over, honestly, who cares? Now, it is important to note that Vince does not, nor has he ever, maintained a shred of respect for his marriage or his wife, something he readily admitted in his 2001 interview with Playboy magazine. How are you as a husband? Well, I tease Linda about the sacrifices I made for my marriage, but she has made enormous sacrifices. When Linda and I got married, I promised her two things: that I'd always love her and that there would never be a boring moment. I've lived up to both promises. I've always been loyal and faithful, not necessarily faithful. I probably lied to myself thinking she knew who I was when we got married, the wild guy, but I never ever threw anything in her face. I was discreet. You were discreet, Vince? And Linda never suffered from a lack of attention, physical or emotional. But one day she asked me point blank, "Are you having an affair with so-and-so?" And I've never lied to her. Yes, it crushed her. And then she asked, "What about such and such?" Yes. It went on. More names. I said yes and yes and yes. Now, bear in mind that all of this was forged as a means to set the stage for a Vince versus Shane match at WrestleMania 17 in April of 2001. And it all started with Vince demanding a divorce from Linda in December of 2000, meaning that this angle, wherein Linda was publicly humiliated by her husband's affair in the most egregious way one could think of, while he also beat the living daylights out of their adult children, and which saw him working with both his own daughter and other men to attack a completely otherwise uninvolved woman who was just trying to further her wrestling career. Well, that went on for 5 months. I'm sorry, there should be limits on things that people are willing to do to boost TV ratings. Now, eventually, yes, Linda and her children did get comeuppance against their evil bastard man of a husband and father at WrestleMania 17. But only after Vince brutally beat Shane in front of a, yet again, unresponsive Linda for several unbroken minutes, at which time she suddenly and inexplicably broke out of her coma to give Vince a good, swift kick in the testicles. And to be fair, albeit in the most disgusting way possible, from what we know now, this was far from the worst angle that Vince ever put forward at WWE. And that, thankfully, not all of his worst impulses made it to television. Likewise, though, in the time period where this angle was being worked in front of the live television audience, Linda was adamant that she was unbothered completely by any of these goings-on, and insisted that the proof of it all was in the popularity of the angle. "I am not divorced," she says with a grin, relaxing in her Stamford, Connecticut office 3 days after Vince's rant at the Garden. The real Linda McMahon, about 5 feet 5 inches tall, has a powerful handshake, an easygoing manner, arresting sky blue eyes, and the composure of a combat veteran. "Maybe I shouldn't tell you this," she says. "If I were doing that performance with an actor or a stranger, I would have burst out laughing. He was so over the top. I had to look to the side of him."
If you could stop it, would you stop that kind of depiction against women on the public airways?
Well, I do believe in the First Amendment rights.
Oh, really, Linda? You believe in the First Amendment? Huh. Could have fooled me.
And content.
So you don't think there's anything wrong with it?
Well, content providers are clearly creating scenarios. From an entertainment point of view, I think that you either elect to go to a movie or you elect to watch a program. So I'm a strong proponent of First Amendment rights. At the same time, at WWE, women really are powerful women.
Okay, I mean, sure, Jan, whatever helps you sleep at night, but yeesh. And as one might expect, this little stunt of Vince's was not universally beloved amongst the rest of the family. As we learned in the clip from which these screen caps came from, that I obviously can't show you, where Shane McMahon highlights very reasonably that if you were the one to create the angle, like Vince was, you also are the one who can uncreate the angle. Yeah, sure, reasonable response from Shane there, though I find it a bit disingenuous, given that by October of 2001, he himself was getting in on the whole family slapitude thing. Or at least he was holding his mother's arms back so his sister Stephanie could slap her in the face. Sure wish I could show you the clip. Now, for reasons I can't possibly imagine, even by the beginning of 2002, Linda had already dramatically decreased her own TV time, and would keep it that way for most of the 2000s. She would be brought out for relatively rare and special occasions, like to announce the first ever WWE draft, or to take a tombstone piledriver from WWE Hall of Famer and current MAGA jerk-off Kane, or to be uncomfortably sexually harassed by then general manager Eric Bischoff, or to get stunned by Stone Cold Steve Austin alongside every other member of her family, or to participate in yet another segment with Vince where he made reference to both their quote-unquote failed marriage and her quote-unquote demon-infested womb, or to throw in the towel for her daughter Stephanie after she was choked unconscious with a lead pipe by her father Vince during the first ever father-daughter I Quit match in WWE history. And I think it was also the last one of those, but at this point I wouldn't bet money on it. I mean, I'd give y'all more context, but do we really need it? And not to mention that this hyper-violent father-daughter clash was booked to take place just 1 week before Stephanie's actual wedding to wrestler Paul Triple H Levesque, because it turns out their little kidnapping angle from before ended up sprouting a real-life romance. And apparently, Linda even threatened to divorce Vince if Stephanie had either a bruise or a black eye for her wedding. Oh, so that's your red line, is it, Linda? Cheat on me, beat up women, insult our very family in front of a sold-out arena or 12. That's fine. But so help me God, if we have to pay extra to get these wedding photos airbrushed, I am out the door. Although it seems like Linda herself may have been tuned in a little bit more than she'd like you to believe with some of Vince's more sadistic tendencies, if we're to believe this 2005 segment, where she mocks and fires beloved longtime WWE announcer and delightful old man Jim Ross before kicking him in the balls for some reason. Anyway though, and unlike his wife Linda, Vince's time in the WWE's television spotlight would only continue to grow throughout the 2000s. And as one might expect by this point, he would use that TV time to continue making a mockery of his marriage, his family, and basic decency. I mean, for one thing, Vince spent basically the entire decade putting himself into one weird sexualized angle after another with as many much younger women wrestlers as he possibly could.
Look at it!
And particularly there saving the absolute worst of his lecherous, misogynistic behavior for his own daughter, Stephanie. Like in this segment, which I'll be honest, I'm well aware of why they claimed this one, because it shows Stephanie claiming that her father sent her out as a teenager to perform favors with grown adult men and business partners of her father to help him secure deals for the company. And likewise, a later segment where he claims to have, and I'm using his words, deflowered her symbolically. And yet it somehow gets even more demented than that, if that's even possible, thanks to none other than Donald Trump again. Specifically when he helped Vince fully realize his latent humiliation kink during the now infamous 2007 Battle of the Billionaires storyline leading up to WrestleMania 23. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of this angle because it was stupid, but essentially, Vince had a Donald Trump impersonator played by wrestler Ace Steel wrestle a Rosie O'Donnell impersonator played by I'm not entirely sure who, which offended Trump, so he showed up on Raw and challenged Vince to a match. Except Vince didn't want to have an actual match where the two of them fought, so instead they both picked representatives to fight for them, Vince picking a Samoan man and Trump picking a black man, because who cares about optics, but with the stipulation that the billionaire whose representative lost the WrestleMania match would have his head shaved in front of everyone at the show. And as you might expect, Vince was the one who ended up losing and having his head shaved, and I'm gonna play as much of this as copyright's gonna allow, but quite frankly, I think we can all agree that whatever's happening here, Vince was working out some demons, shall we say. So yeah, it turns out the amount that copyright will allow is 0. So I'll just tell you that Vince was, while having his arms restrained by his favoritist big beefy men, exclaiming to the crowd, "Don't humiliate me!" Yeah, honestly be glad this one got claimed. Oh, and because I have absolutely nowhere else to bring this up, but like I kind of have to, Trump also came back to WWE programming again in 2009 for a weird angle where he pretended to buy Monday Night Raw, like not the WWE, just one of their television shows. I don't know, it never made sense. He then operated exactly one commercial-free episode of Monday Night Raw just to show off how cool and rich he was, before Vince came back the next week and agreed to buy his own show back from Donald Trump, and for twice the price Trump paid for it for some reason. And not to mention that while all of this was going on, the McMahons were donating significant amounts of money, just shy of $10 million from what I could find, to one of Trump's charities. Donald Trump and Vince McMahon inflating the price of a fake thing to sell back and forth to each other in front of everyone for clout, while also dubiously passing giant sums of money to each other through charities so no one notices? Color me double shocked, I say. Anyway, though, back to Linda. So what exactly was she getting up to all this time after she had stepped away from the WWE cameras? Well, to find out more about that, let's head on to our next chapter. So while Linda's activities during this time in the mid to late 2000s weren't nearly as scandalous or as public as those of her husband per se, she was making moves and putting things into position for herself behind the scenes in other ways. I mean, somebody had to answer emails and such while Vince was running around making all the 20-year-old wrestling women as uncomfortable as he possibly could, right? And yet, by this point in history, and particularly given what we know now, it seems as if Linda had already gotten overcome with a bold new motivation for her own career. Namely, aspirations of political grandeur. Yes, you heard that right. The daughter-slapping, husband-enabling, groin-kicking girl boss herself, well, she decided that at least the state of Connecticut absolutely needed her own unique brand of leadership. And it seems like Linda may have been putting some of these pieces in place even while trotting around with her family as part of primetime TV's favorite dumpster fire, specifically through her role as a key leader in WWE's philanthropic efforts. For one was their Get Real campaign, which began in the year 2000 and which reportedly worked with US libraries to increase children's interest in reading, and which apparently did at one point have the single most popular celebrity reading poster ever printed. I mean, I'm sorry, Kirk, you gotta admit, that's just a way cooler reading poster than yours. Likewise, the WWE also started to more directly engage with American politics at this point in its history as well. I mean, wrestling had always been political to a certain degree. I mean, nothing gets the crowd fired up like a good old USA chant, and likewise, at least back in the 80s and 90s, the easiest way to turn someone heel in a wrestling show was to just say they were from another country. But particularly in the wake of 9/11, the company seized a lot of political momentum, specifically by becoming the first major sporting event televised live in the United States after the tragedy, with a live broadcast of their SmackDown show taking place in Houston, Texas, just 2 days later on September 13th of 2001, at an event which saw Vince in particular leaning very directly into the patriotism of the whole thing. And ironically, I wanted to show you this clip as well because it demonstrated a bit of WWE's changing image towards the positive, but in a move to cut their own nose off to spite their face, the WWE also copyright claimed this segment. And the whole thing set the scene for the WWE to become a much bigger political presence in the United States moving forward. Linda herself even got in on the post-9/11 action about a month later, delivering a donation directly to the New York City mayor at the time, Rudy Giuliani, in support of the victims of 9/11. And in 2003, the company began a formal partnership with the Department of Defense, resulting in the Tribute to the Troops wrestling event series, which would bring live WWE shows to overseas military bases and which received personal commendation from the likes of then-President George W. Bush. In yet another positive WWE clip that I also can't show you because of their little copyright claims. But the company's political aspirations weren't just limited to the 9/11 stuff either. There was also the Smackdown Your Vote campaign. Started in 2000 to increase voter registration and turnout among young people, with which the WWE was exceptionally popular, SmackDown Your Vote actually ended up being a pretty long-running and successful PR campaign for the company. Not that I'm able to show you a clip or anything, because once again, WWE is screwing themselves over and even claiming their good stuff. See, Linda? See how this hurts all of us? And SmackDown Your Vote would see a variety of slickly produced pro-voting PSAs featuring your favorite WWE superstars, broadcasted on their flagship programs, and admittedly likely at least somewhat effective at getting younger voters to register. Likewise, the campaign would also see some of WWE's top talent being sent all the way to both the DNC and the RNC in each of its 3 election cycles.
I'm going to show you my naivete, all this crowd around you, and I had no idea who you are. Who is The Rock?
That's okay. Well, I didn't know you either, so I guess we're kind of even. Who is The Rock? The Rock is the most electrifying man in sports entertainment, the WWF champion. Rock is here representing the people, being the people's champion as well, and again, not necessarily to try and sway votes towards the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate, for that matter, as much as he is just here to, to make sure that the 22 million viewers The Rock reaches every single week exercises their right to vote.
You invited The Rock, the World Wrestling Federation champion, to speak at the Republican National Convention? Well, The Rock says this: what's the matter with you people? If The Rock didn't know any better, he'd say you might be trying to reach out to all The Rock's fans, the 14 million eligible voters who watch The Rock every single week.
And by its last run in 2008, the SmackDown Your Vote campaign was apparently so influential with young voters that the WWE managed to draw all of that cycle's major presidential candidates onto their show directly. Now, SmackDown Your Vote does seem to have been formally retired in 2008 for reasons I don't entirely understand. But all the same, the WWE would continue its full-court press into the world of American politics, likely fueled by Linda's ever-growing aspirations. For one thing, there was the company's short-lived partnership with the Army National Guard, which basically just saw the National Guard sponsoring some WWE pay-per-views at the time, and in turn the company broadcasting recruitment propaganda during some of its commercial breaks. There was also the company's second major foray into the world of advancing public literacy, this time dubbed the WrestleMania Reading Challenge, which offered American students tickets to WWE shows in exchange for hitting certain reading targets, which admittedly I must say does seem a lot cooler than the personal pan pizzas I got from Book It. But hey, I'm not going to look a gift pizza in the mouth. That pizza was delicious back in the day and I knew I earned it. But more broadly, around this time the WWE product also seemed to adapt around the company's desire to be taken more seriously by the American moral mainstream as well, with the 2008 introduction of what is now known among wrestling fans as the PG era of WWE programming. That year, the company gave up voluntarily their more risque TV-14 rating and instead traded it in for the more widely accessible TV PG rating. In turn, though, the company was forced to give up some highly popular and profitable elements of its wrestling product, most notably toning way down on the sex, violence, and profanity. For example, John Cena's finishing move, the cheekily named FU, was quietly renamed to the Attitude Adjustment so as to avoid naughty words. Likewise, blood and most weaponry would end up being banned from their TV broadcasts, after having been staples of said broadcasts for many years up to that point. And last but certainly not least, gone too were Vince's pillow fights, his bra and panty matches, his hot lesbian action segments, yes, that's what they called them, HLA to be specific, wherein, at the time, General Manager Eric Bischoff would invite women to come to the ring and kiss and rub on each other and all of the things that straight men think lesbians do, before inexplicably inviting two of the largest men on the roster to come out and beat up said lesbians to the applause of the crowd. Oh, and by the way, he also involved Stephanie in this one too. Happy Pride, y'all! And his intergender punishment matches of days gone by, instead replaced with a much kinder and gentler product for the women, or divas, of WWE, like the Ask the Divas segments, which saw the women of WWE giving playful advice on things like dating and how to accomplish your goals, and once again, which I can't show you because care to take a guess? Now, if you believe Linda McMahon, she would say that the PG era was designed for the company to appeal itself to a new, younger generation of potentially lifelong fans, helping them to develop interest in and loyalty to the WWE brand that would hopefully continue throughout the rest of their lives.
I mean, I'm a woman, you're a woman. What do you really think when you see some of that go on in the ring? The girl who was told to get on all fours, I think by your own husband, and bark like a dog. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, WWE programming has changed from being TV 14 over the years, which that's the time you were talking about, it was called the Attitude Era, into now being PG. Rated by the networks as PG. I'm happy with the content today. And the programming content, as I said, has changed from TV 14 to TV PG. I much prefer it today.
A lot of folks have also pointed the finger at Mattel Toys, highlighting their likely interest in toning down the WWE shows so as not to scare parents away from their lucrative line of licensed WWE toys. I can't imagine what might have made them think parents would be uneasy with WWE's wrestling product, but still, it's a prominent fan theory. And yet, while it certainly can't be proven that Linda's political aspirations played some part in this change to the PG rating, well, it certainly makes a lot of sense. Especially given the fact that in 2009, just 1 year after putting the PG era into motion, Linda would take her first formal turn as a real, dyed-in-the-wool politician, following her appointment to the Connecticut Board of Education by then Republican governor and close friend of Linda's, Jody Rell. But we'll go ahead and explore these political forays in the next chapter of our story. Once again, nominated by former Connecticut governor, personal friend, and sort of doppelganger of Linda's, Jody Rell, Linda's nomination to the Connecticut Board of Education came with, as you might expect, a fair amount of controversy. And naturally, most of this controversy did seem to stem from Linda's time with the WWE, along with the brand's particularly rough public profile. Linda particularly got in trouble for answering no to several pre-nomination survey questions that she likely should have answered yes to, almost all of them having to do with the nature of the work she had done for the WWE. Likewise, though, concerns were also rightfully raised about just her basic qualifications for this job, with some highlighting that a longtime wrestling CEO with no real background in education or educational policy, maybe she wasn't the best fit for a role of this kind. Linda also didn't help her own case by first listing that she had a bachelor's degree in education, before hastily going back to correct the record and let everyone know that she had a bachelor's degree in French with a teaching certificate, which is a little similar but pretty different in this context. Now, was it likely a clerical error? Yeah. But was it also something she should have well known she couldn't get away with, especially given all the concerns about her qualifications in the first place? Also, yeah. All that being said, though, I feel like we could also see the beginning of what would become Linda McMahon's overall political strategy for the next several years come into clear focus during this time in her life. Specifically, the brief biography she provided to the sitting members of the board is basically a microcosmic roadmap for how Linda would come to address herself and her political qualifications moving forward. I mean, for at least the next decade or so. A brief acknowledgement of her time as the CEO of WWE, along with a nod to how strange it is that someone like her would be interested in a political role before quickly moving on. An equally brief acknowledgement of her family, because even by 2009, people had Google, and as we've seen by now, she did not need anyone looking up those people or associating her name with the likes of Vince McMahon. Also, a rundown of how successful the WWE had been as a company and all of the charity work that they'd done, along with a very specific mention of her longtime work on the board at Sacred Heart University, a Catholic college in Connecticut that I'm pretty sure she only brings up to prove she's actually kinda got a religion or something. and then a super vague statement about why she wants the role she's up for and is qualified enough for it at least before wrapping up. And to her credit, this time at least, the strategy would work, and Linda would secure herself a seat on the Connecticut Board of Education. And likewise, her time on the board would be relatively uneventful from at least every source I could find. All of the news coverage I found from that time focused on the strangeness of her nomination, and once she cleared through that process, it seemed like nobody cared anymore. She did the usual kind of stuff one would expect from a person in a role like this, like touring local schools with a look of kind concern on her face. She also showed up at meetings, and even talked sometimes, although it seems like that was quite rare from what I could tell, and honestly, that was likely for the best.
When do we reestablish the cut scores?
Well, typically at the beginning of a generation when we're changing the test, we change the content.
Which is next? Good question, Linda.
That depends on NCLB, I guess.
Right.
2014.
2000.
Yeah.
On average, about how often does that happen?
About every 5 years.
5 to 8 years, depending. And I think...
And most of what I found where she did talk was just her talking protectively about charter schools. So clearly she had the white Republican woman on a school board thing down pat, even by this point.
Relative to charter schools that you were mentioning earlier, if my information is correct, in Connecticut, we fund charter schools not at 100%, but about 66, 67%.
It's roughly $8,000, $9,000 per student, so I think that's probably a right percentage. That's correct.
And then the charter school provides the facility. That's not state funded, correct?
That's correct.
So under the Race to the Top provision for expansion of charter schools, it would be under the same funding that we currently do.
Unless we change the law.
Unless we change the law.
Right.
But in reviewing some of these long, boring-ass tapes from Connecticut Board of Education meetings gone by, revealed to me that even in the most banal and sterile of settings, Linda McMahon is just somehow gonna make things weird just by showing up. For example, did anyone notice that giant black eye she had in the last clip? That's kind of weird, especially given that it's Linda McMahon in particular. And not to mention, I personally was completely unable to find a wrestling reason as to why this black eye might have occurred, since Linda was well off of WWE programming for the most part at this point. Take for that what you will, I suppose.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
But there was also, well, not only a weirdly prescient joke about wearing masks to stop the spread of the H1N1 swine flu that was spreading around at the time, and that far too closely echoed more recent pandemics, shall we say, but there was also Linda's oddly long supervillain laugh in response to the joke.
Plus the observation that if your idea of masks being used by sick people to go to the grocery store ever catches on, it's a great way of getting through the lines quickly. More seriously.
But perhaps most important about Linda's time on the Connecticut Board of Education is that it was very short-lived, with her taking the role in 2009 before resigning the very next year. See, Linda McMahon had much greater aspirations than just helping out local kids. She wanted national power. She wanted to be a senator. And to that end, she had already firmly fixed her eyes on the upcoming 2010 race in Connecticut for that job. To be fair, these senatorial aspirations were already pretty well known even by the time she took the position on the Board of Education. She was still sitting on the board when she announced her run for the Senate in 2009, and she only resigned when it was discovered in 2010 that she couldn't solicit political donations while also sitting on the Board of Education. What's more, by that time it was already pretty obvious that her time on the Connecticut Board of Education was little more than just a practice run for the Senate run, given that she basically copied the Board of Education strategy she used earlier outright for her Senate campaign. Take a look at Linda's very first ad from this election cycle, and I think you'll see what I mean.
I'm Linda McMahon, and I'm running for the United States Senate because I just can't sit on the sidelines anymore. I think it's time we took a different approach to how things are done in Washington. I've lived in Connecticut for over 30 years, raised my family here, built a successful business here. Like many of you, I'm concerned by what I'm seeing in Washington, and I plan on bringing a fresh perspective to the difficult challenges facing our country.
Sure, yeah. A fresh perspective on the challenges facing this country or whatever. Did anybody else notice something she conveniently didn't bring up? Like, oh, I don't know, the name of the billion-dollar company she had operated for 3 decades up to that point? Yeah, that level of attempted misdirection was never gonna fly in a run like this. And the headlines from around that time punished her for it, like Vince punished Stephanie in that match we saw earlier. And so Linda tried again, this time tipping her hand a little bit more about having been the longtime CEO of television's favorite circus of violence, while also working hard to keep things focused on her and her achievements.
World Wrestling Entertainment really grew out of the roots of the wrestling business into an entertainment business. We were the first people to ever acknowledge that it was entertainment, that it was scripted episodic television. We have shows that are on USA Network, Sci-Fi Network, My Network TV, WGN, and now it's seen in 145 countries and translated in over 30 languages. This is a company, a corporation that is traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So there is a really strong corporate structure behind producing this product.
Likewise, at this point, Linda also got a little more open about her family, taking her son-in-law Triple H on some campaign stops and even pretending to have a good marriage with Vince.
Growing up in a small town, Linda McMahon trained to become a teacher, but life had other plans. She married Vince, her high school sweetheart, and together they would change the world of entertainment.
And in fact, she was particularly fond of trotting out her well-spoken daughter Stephanie for campaign spots, both as a narrator and, well, quite frankly, as a liar, I think. I mean, would a woman who openly professed to basically being raised by her brother say this?
When I was young, my parents lost everything. But I never knew because our home was always filled with love. Most people just see one side of Linda McMahon. The tough, capable CEO who led the way on USO, Make-A-Wish projects, and was instrumental in making WWE more family-friendly. But I see the other side. I see my mom, and I hope that I can be half the mother to my 3 girls that she was to me.
But finally, it seems like Linda did learn that Connecticut voters were not, in fact, complete morons, and she instead decided to lean into it all as much as she could, even having some fun with all of it in another round of political ads.
Before I decided to run for the Senate, I had a regular job. Okay, maybe not a regular job. I was the CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment, a soap opera that entertains millions every week. And everyone gets in on the action.
So what do you think about Linda McMahon?
Well, I like what she's saying.
What about the wrestling stuff?
Not exactly my cup of tea.
Oh, it's a soap opera.
Really?
Look, she tamed the traveling show world of professional wrestling, turned it into a global company, and created 500 jobs here in Connecticut.
All right, so? Think she can shake things up in Washington?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And yet, for the most part, Linda stayed true to the original roadmap, focusing on a relentless schedule of events and stumping while backing it up with the kind of ad blitz that only a comically huge war chest of over $50 million in self-donated funds can buy. Oh yeah, I guess that's an important detail too. Linda pledged around $50 million of her family's own personal fortune towards the campaign. Chump change for a billionaire, sure, but in most situations like this, enough money to just basically buy a Senate seat outright. Now to Linda's credit, she did the little things too. She even took the time to go on local TV and bake an entire chocolate walnut pie with the show's hosts, as we'll see in this lovely 240p clip taken from Linda's own 2010 campaign YouTube channel. which I guess I've taken all the other stuff from that channel too, so I don't know why I mentioned it there, but still, it's all from her 2010 campaign YouTube channel, which is still up.
So I'm going to do this because the instructions say you add this gradually. So I'm going to pour the mixture in, and you just keep stirring. You can also do this in a mixer on low speed.
This is how the Senate is going to work once you get there. It's Republicans and Democrats working together in a symmetry of beauty.
Just a little stir.
I don't want to get smacked down here. I want to get everything right.
I won't deny, that pie sounds delicious and certainly a lot more matronly than the, I don't know, high-protein baked chicken breast and salt broccoli I expected her to bring. That being said, it was also a pretty bold choice for her to cook a pie in this situation, given the fact that her wrestlers sometimes used the phrase poontang pie when referring to vaginas on television. And Lord knows she did not need anyone at home Googling the phrase Linda McMahon pie. But see though, here's the thing about becoming a senator. Unlike pro wrestling matches, which generally only have one fall, instead, winning a match for the Senate, well, it actually sort of requires 2 falls, since one must first get through their party's primary before moving on to the championship round. And the thing about primaries, they're nasty. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? In a general election, you're usually competing with someone distinctly different from yourself and coming from a different party, no less, while also trying to deal with a mixed crowd of folks, some of whom believe you and agree with you, and some of whom don't believe you and agree with you. Well, at least that's how it was in 2010. But in a primary, the goal is more oftentimes to stand out for being the candidate who is most representative of that party's beliefs, rather than aiming to be any kind of pragmatist. The goal in this situation is not appeal to a large group of people and the diversity of thought that comes with it, like you would see in a general election, but rather appeal to the small number of political zealots who were willing to show up for this halvesies vote. And Linda's strategy seemed to be very distinctly focused around preparations for taking on the Democrats in the general election. Likely and somewhat reasonably assuming that her ability to just straight up outspend her primary competition would at least carry her to a victory in a formality like a primary.
My detailed jobs plan is ready to go, and it's backed up by experience.
By presenting herself as a milquetoast fiscal conservative and pseudo-centrist, Linda may have thought that she was preparing to get a bunch of Democrats comfortable with her in the general election, but it came with the unfortunate side effect of leaving her wide open to a variety of moral and cultural attacks from within her own party. Now, full transparency here. Throughout my research process, this time and truthfully any time I've ever covered an election cycle like this, I've found it particularly difficult to locate specifically old political attack ads. I can usually find a fair number of positive ads, like the ones I've already been showing you from Linda's campaign, which all came from Linda's 2010 YouTube campaign account.
Linda's very practical. She is what you see. She loves to laugh. She has a great sense of humor. Nothing really gets her down. And she understands people and she feels for people. She just is constantly a very positive person. I think she would be an outstanding senator.
And those types of ads are still often public-facing even years later, which I suspect is related to the fact that they're relatively non-controversial usually. Not to mention generally disinteresting to anyone who's not a dweeb extraordinaire like me.
Go outside, nerd. Get out. Go.
But it seems, as far as I can tell, like most campaigns take down negative ads the second they stop being useful or cause too much controversy. Likely because an opponent will either start complaining, or otherwise just because having them up at all can end up leading to some backfired negative publicity. And this is particularly relevant in today's episode for a couple of reasons. For one, several sources I found indicated that both Linda and her campaign opponents had a distinct fondness for negative attack-style advertising. Some folks even chastised the entire campaign cycles she was involved in for just being particularly mean-spirited.
Now, over the last few weeks, Connecticut voters have seen you attack each other on the airwaves. Many times. many, many times.
Given the nasty nature of the advertising and the debates, would you please say something nice about your opponent?
Linda McMahon is clearly a very driven person. She's someone, when she sets her mind to something, has shown that she can accomplish that. She has, over the last several years, made some substantial investments in some Connecticut charities. I know that has done some good things for people.
Well, I think one of the nicest things that I've seen about Congressman Murphy are his 2 little boys. They are so cute. And being a grandmother with 6 little grandchildren, and I look at them and I imagine the kind of pride that he has in watching them every day.
And yet I have struggled mightily to find any direct record of those attack ads. Most of what I have been able to find has been either just old Fox News footage or stuff from the Wayback Machine with samples of the ads played, but hardly any original recordings like you find with the positive ads.
The people who want to be U.S. Senator from the great state up there got together and debated. However, they both have new attack ads on each other. We're going to play a little snippet and then we're going to get your reaction. Watch this, because right now Blumenthal is just a little bit ahead of McMahon.
Worry about serving in a war. We have learned something very important since the days that I served in Vietnam. Dick Blumenthal did, again and again. If he lied about Vietnam, what else
As
is he
CEO,
lying
McMahon
about?
laid off workers yet took millions in bonuses. No wonder she opposes Wall Street reform. McMahon spent thousands on lobbyists to get millions in tax breaks for herself. Linda McMahon. A bad CEO. A worse senator.
There's even one ad that I swear, y'all, I lost an entire day of research trying to find. Known as the Job Killer ad. This commercial from Democratic PAC Progress Connecticut apparently just pulled no punches whatsoever. Reports indicate that the ad accused the WWE of being complicit in late wrestler Chris Benoit's drug use, and as such, for being partly responsible when he went on to murder his wife and child before taking his own life. The clip even reportedly brought in Benoit's own father to drive the point home. It reportedly also brought in Chris Nowinski, a badass neuroscientist and CTE advocate who also just happens to be a former wrestler and years-long thorn in the McMahon family's collective side, to insinuate that some of the company's top stars were still potentially using steroids with company approval, up to and including Linda's own son-in-law, Triple H. And y'all, I could not find this ad to save my life. So, I think we can all piece together what happened. Just kidding. I actually found the Job Killer ad. Turns out there are ways one can download YouTube videos that have been unlisted or otherwise removed in certain capacities, and I figured out how to do that for this ad specifically. Y'all want to see it? Of course you do. So without further ado, here is the Linda McMahon Job Killer ad.
Well, the wrestling world in shock today. Former champion Chris Benoit found dead in his Atlanta home along with his wife and young son. Police now treating the discovery as a double murder-suicide.
We like what we do. We
like
what you do. We like what we do.
Benoit told his father he'd come to depend on drugs, amphetamines, painkillers, steroids, and more.
And my words to Chris at that time were, "Chris, why are you doing these things?" And his response to me at the time was, "Dad, if I want a job, I have to."
And they are encouraging steroid use. You look at the champions they've had lately, the Batistas, the Triple H's. I mean, it's garbage that they're not using stuff. It gives you an enlarged heart, which is why guys are dying from heart failure.
I'll put words. Linda McMahon is completely full of it when she says what she says about either not knowing or that this is like a studio. I mean,
We like what we do.
Likewise, though, Linda seems to have already had her team absolutely scour the internet for any traces of her own negative attack ads. And for someone who apparently absolutely loved using these things, you would be hard-pressed to find a single negative ad Linda McMahon made at all anymore, as far as I can tell. But do you know who does still have several of their negative attack-style campaign ads up publicly for all to see? Linda's 2010 Republican primary opponent, former U.S. Representative, and perhaps Linda's biggest op until I came along, Rob Simmons. See, before Linda decided to enter that primary race, Rob was the frontrunner. But then all of a sudden, Rob was being outspent legitimately sevenfold by the McMahon campaign, and he would very quickly move into second place off of the back of her sheer name recognition. And so, desperate to regain his position at the head of the pack, Simmons went ahead and pulled a page from the late, great Eric Mays.
When they go low, I go lower.
But see, unlike everyone else involved in this story, Rob Simmons seems to have forgotten the whole scrub the internet of any trace of your negative ad campaigns thing that everyone else remembered, with several of his old negative attack ads still publicly available on his own campaign YouTube channel from back in 2010. And y'all, they are rough for Linda McMahon. He goes after her for her weak record on foreign policy, while also taking the time to flex a little bit of conversational Chinese, at least as far as I can tell, because I don't speak Chinese.
In 2007, I opened our office in Shanghai, which is a whole different culture and environment, and I think a United States Senator has to understand the culture that exists outside our country.
I'm also proud to have spent 10 years with the Central Intelligence Agency, most of that time overseas on difficult and dangerous assignments, some of them in China. 我真谢谢你说到那个上海的工作，谢谢。And on that point, I thank Linda for raising the issue.
He also posted his own memoriam to a long list of wrestlers who died oddly young. Rob also reposted old news stories of the WWE's dubious record on things like employee and workplace safety.
Former WWE CEO Linda McMahon has surged to the top among Republicans in the most recent public opinion poll, with a nearly non-stop advertising campaign and extensively reaching out to party activists. But pro wrestling investigative author Irvin Muchnick thinks Connecticut voters should take a closer look at McMahon's tenure as head of World Wrestling Entertainment. In his book, Chris and Nancy, Nick details the death of WWE superstar Chris Benoit.
WWE and Linda McMahon created the atmosphere and the working conditions that have caused many, many deaths in the industry, of which the Benoit one was just the most dramatic and heinous example.
All of those superstars who are independent contractors, if they're injured or hurt in the ring, they're well cared for. There's a health and wellness policy in place.
WWE has what they call a wellness policy, and it's a joke. The fact of the matter is they had no steroid testing at all between 1996 and 2006, and they should be better taken care of by WWE. The great thing about her candidacy for the Senate is it is yet another platform for people to look at what I think is a public health nuisance.
And in what I would consider to be the coup de grace of his anti-Linda crusade, Rob put out an ad aptly titled Really Sick, and boy does it live up to that moniker. The ad starts itself off by informing the world that Linda's husband Vince owned a yacht named the Sexy Bitch, before just straight up going off on the entire brand for a full 90 seconds.
They flip the bird. Oh my. They draw blood, then drink it. And they throw in an occasional human sacrifice.
Sometimes they actually make a girl into a man, a man into a girl, and then they switch that around with a man, and then they sort of mate together, and then that is really sick parts.
Action figures, dolls. These aren't being bought by and enjoyed by adults. These are for 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds. T-shirts with vulgar expressions written on them. These are being worn and purchased by kids or by adults for kids. The WWF would cease to exist without children.
Oof, that's not good. And the thing is, Linda is always going to be subject to these kind of attacks in particular. She cannot escape the WWE, given how many years she was in charge, everything that happened during those years she was in charge, and no matter how much money or effort she pumps into rebranding her public profile. It got so bad during this 2010 cycle that the WWE famously started their absolutely audacious Stand Up for WWE campaign to try and give the company's public image a jolt of much needed but also relatively undeserved goodwill. This campaign peppered WWE's live shows with ads featuring everyone from the wrestlers to the road crew to even just fans sitting down and talking about how great and not a complete train wreck of sexism and labor issues the company was.
I've been enjoying St. Paul pork products for years. It's still the same family-run business that Walter and Vera Pilarski started in 1920 when they raised and slaughtered their first pig. Oh, I just love St. Paul pork products.
But perhaps most boldly, the campaign even asked its own devoted paying fans to somehow give even more of themselves to the company by donating their time to post about or even just talk about with their friends how super awesome this for-profit enterprise was. Oh, I'm sorry. Are the TV subscription and t-shirt revenue you get from me not enough? Well, let me just go ahead and email the mayor for you. Maybe we should do a parade. Should we call Bella Hadid? Anyway, though, and regardless of all of it, Linda's money did still shine through all the way to the end of this primary cycle. And she won without too much of a fight, even from Rob. But all the same, the damage was already done. And moving into the general election, her Democratic opponent and former Connecticut Attorney General Richard Blumenthal, well, he just basically had to pick up where Rob Simmons left off. Well, except actually that's not even entirely true. Connecticut is generally considered a Democratic stronghold, and Linda, all other things being equal, was already at a massive disadvantage even just coming out of the primary. Blumenthal was already being outspent like mad.
A $50 million negative attack machine is bound to narrow the polls, and we expected it. It's happened.
And had a scandal chasing him around involving some lies he told about his service in Vietnam.
On a few occasions, I have misspoken about my service, and I regret that, and I take full responsibility.
And yet he was still the odds-on favorite over Linda. What's more, the WWE stuff was already well known by this point. Blumenthal didn't even really have to campaign on it very hard. Instead, all he just had to do was let the constant SmackDown puns live as a constant reminder of Linda and the sordid albatross of WWE draped over her neck. Hell, even Barack Obama himself got in on the action.
Now, Connecticut, let's face it, this decision in this election should be a no-brainer. Here you've got a man who's been fighting for the people of Connecticut since the day he walked into the Attorney General's office. Somebody who doesn't just show up and try to get a victory by writing a big check and flooding the airwaves with negative ads. Now, I have to say, Dick said his opponent may have more money. Dick, she has more money than you. I mean, it's... Just in case there's any confusion. And I understand she has promised a smackdown. That is what she said. And look, there's no doubt I can see how somebody who's been in professional wrestling would think that they're right at home at the United States Senate.
Now, all of this was not for Linda's lack of trying, mind you. As we heard, she was still spending like mad this entire time, and doing everything she could conceivably do to try and win. Even jumping onto the World Wide Web to chat directly with some of her constituents, which in 2009-2010 was still a very new concept.
Can't get to everybody all of the time, but yet to be able to have voters submit their questions and have you respond in a technical environment where they are is a really good thing. So I think it's very important for voters to have an opportunity to access, a candidate in many different ways.
I'm very horny, and I'm looking for some good cyber sex.
Likewise, she cashed out some important political favors in this cycle too, like getting Rudy Giuliani to pay her back for that 9/11 check we saw earlier.
You take somebody who's pro-jobs, the other who's anti-business and anti-jobs, there's really not much of a choice. I mean, Linda's the right choice for the Senate right now. Sure as heck the right answer for the country.
Linda even participated in the time-honored tradition of being an awkward white politician at a predominantly black church to reaffirm that, yes, she at least had some kind of Christian credentials. Yet, none of this worked. The state was likely already just too blue as it was to even consider her Republican ass being a senator. And not to mention that if she ever got close to him, Blumenthal could just, I don't know, organize a press conference with Chris Benoit's father again to talk about how Linda wasn't returning his calls. Furthermore, Blumenthal did take that same anti-WWE strategy with him to their debates, dragging the company's long-maligned, extremely exploitative independent contractor arrangements right to the forefront of the conversation.
There is a certain irony in my opponent talking about healthcare reform because she denies healthcare insurance to the wrestlers who work for. In fact, her company's under investigation right now for improperly and illegally misclassifying those employees, denying healthcare insurance, as well as dodging taxes for unemployment compensation, Social Security, and Medicare.
And the independent contractors have full health coverage for any accident that they receive in the ring, whether they have surgery or rehab, fully covered. And I find it a little bit unusual, maybe just a coincidence, that in the 20-some years that WWE has been in Connecticut, it's never been investigated or fined relative to its independent contractors. And the only time it's been investigated was just after this campaign got going. So I'm not sure exactly why that might be. The only time you've ever stopped by WWE is when you came to visit me and we had a cup of tea.
As you well know, my jurisdiction is exclusively civil. The allegations against WWE seem to be criminal in nature. So it's no coincidence that my investigation has not covered them.
And Linda also didn't help her own case in a lot of regard, fumbling easier issues like increasing the minimum wage by being such a fiscally conservative centrist that no one actually knew what her stance on the issue even was.
She took home $46 million, and now she's talking about lowering the minimum wage.
I'm guessing that you would take umbrage with the depiction of your business as that way.
Let me say categorically that is wrong and absolutely false and is incorrect in this ad is that I would consider reducing the minimum wage. That's a lie. You know that's a lie. I never said it, and it's in your ad, and boy, that's just wrong. So let's take that off the table.
The record will show that when my opponent was asked, would she cut the minimum wage, she said she would have to look at it. The record will show incontrovertibly that that is so. And we need to preserve the minimum wage, and I would have said absolutely not.
You are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
And in the end, Linda would lose this race to Blumenthal, and in convincing fashion, no less. And yet, by all accounts, that fighting spirit of hers raged on, with Linda just picking up the pieces and setting her sights on the upcoming 2012 Senate election cycle. For one thing, she dropped yet another $50 million during this election cycle too, because money just means nothing to these people.
You can't just have someone who's made a fortune and wants a new toy. And in my opinion, that's what she represents.
Likewise, though, she employed a lot of her same basic strategy from the 2010 cycle. For starters, the vague, feel-goody stories of her own supposed homespun charm, and of overcoming adversity that all conveniently leave out the thing she's actually known for.
All the lawyers and career politicians in Congress have gotten us in a mess. The last time Connecticut had a job creator as senator, John Kennedy was president. And Connecticut has never had a woman senator. I've created hundreds of good jobs here. I focus on results, not partisan politics. I'm an independent thinker who knows we have to work together to grow our economy and create jobs. I'm Linda McMahon. I approve this message, and I'm asking for your vote.
Now, notably, there is one place where things changed pretty obviously from 2010, since from everything I could find, I couldn't even find her playfully mentioning the WWE during this election cycle. Instead, just taking the approach to pretend the entire company didn't exist and hope nobody noticed, while continuing to target her opponent with another battery of attack ads. Though that certainly didn't stop her from bringing her daughter Stephanie back out for yet another assist. I mean, once again, would a woman who already told us that she was basically raised by her brothers say this?
I've always said that I only wish that I could be half the mother that my mom was. My mom and I used to do everything together. So on the weekends, I'd go with her to run errands, to go grocery shopping. And when you ask about vivid, happy memories, it's so many.
So that was a fucking lie.
She also cashed in some more important political favors at this point, like getting the support of former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie.
In New Jersey, all the pundits and all the smart Alex on television, they all said, you elect this Chris Christie guy, there's going to be nothing but gridlock in Trenton. But guess what happened? You come with strong ideas and the power of your principles, and you reach your hand across the aisle to right-thinking Democrats and say to them, listen, do you want to be obstructionists? Or do you want to try to work to better our state for the people who elected all of us? And if you elect an independent thinker like Linda McMahon, she will bring it to the United States.
You believe this fucking guy?
And in fact, she was actually leaning in pretty heavy on the whole bipartisan thing this time around.
Republican Linda McMahon says she's had only positive reaction to her latest TV advertising, featuring voters who claim they're voting for President Obama and Linda McMahon.
I'm voting for President Barack Obama and Linda McMahon on the independent line.
Linda will work with President Obama, and I believe he'll work with her.
But don't get it twisted. Linda hadn't fully taken her fingers off the pulse of the Republican zeitgeist at that time either, and tapped into that all the same.
Well, just went in and voted, and I voted for Mitt Romney. He has a business background. I really believe that he, more than any other candidate, will, in fact, turn our economy around and get our country back on track.
I'm a Republican voting for Mitt Romney.
What's more, Linda's primary opponents this time around were much softer on her than Rob Simmons had been. Former Representative Chris Shays, the only Republican even close to Linda in the primaries at this point, well, he focused on his own record and electability, rather than steering any of the conversation towards Linda's wrestling background. And in the end, just like last time, Linda rode a giant wave of money all the way to primary victory. And just like last time, the Democrats were waiting in the wings, ready to pounce. While her opponent for this cycle, former Connecticut Representative Chris Murphy, was a little less aggressive on her than Blumenthal had been in regards to the WWE stuff, he was no less plenty aggressive about his own talking points when debating her.
Well, Linda McMahon should stop spreading this fiction that I have no plan to create jobs. I know that she made her living making up stories in the wrestling ring, but it's not okay to make them up when you're running for the United States Senate. My plan to create jobs in the state is rooted in the work that I've done in public service, and that's based in focusing tax cuts on the middle class, not as Linda McMahon does, by focusing tax cuts on the affluent and the rich. Damn! My focus is on rebuilding our educational system, not divesting from funding in our most important services as a state.
Although, it's not like Murphy avoided the WWE controversies either. The job killer ad we talked about before, that was from this campaign. Likewise was another ad I wasn't able to find that was dubbed the PG era ad, which just apparently featured a lot of WWE's most un-PG content all smushed together in one commercial, and apparently which was swiftly taken down once again for copyright. Furthermore, Linda's middling, centrist, conservative persona once again backfired on her. The Romney endorsement particularly blew up in her face just a few months after she made it, when comments he made stating that 40% of Americans were lazy do-nothings was made public. Though, admittedly, it was kind of hard for her to distance from Romney's comments when she herself had said basically the same damn thing just a year prior. And of course, the Democrats pounced on that as well, reportedly playing an ad across the state which portrayed Linda as a kind of card shark, carefully wrangling tax policy to benefit wealthy folks like her, rather than working-class citizens of Connecticut. Likewise, though it seems like this ad has also been scrubbed from the internet, are we starting to notice a pattern here? And that pattern is that the WWE can't hide from me, because just like with the job killer ad, I also found the supposedly deleted card shark ad. So, enjoy.
Her ads say she's for us, but watch carefully as Linda McMahon does a sleight of hand. Her tax plan hurts middle-class families like you and you and you, while cutting taxes for millionaires like herself. Here's another trick. Take the Department of Education. McMahon threatened to eliminate it, cutting early reading programs and college Pell Grants. Linda McMahon. She's fixed the game against Connecticut's middle class.
But all of that's not even to mention that Linda made just some boneheaded mistakes on her own part as well throughout this cycle. Most notably trying to call Murphy out for nearly losing his home to foreclosure and getting preferential financial treatment due to his status as a representative, before nearly immediately having her own financial records released, which demonstrated that her company still owed thousands in back payments on her own decades-old bankruptcy. And especially given how much Linda loved to bring up that whole bankruptcy thing to try and make herself look relatable and tough, this was, in my opinion at least, a particularly rough mark on the campaign's credibility.
Today, the entertainment business that I helped create is a success. But there was a time when we had to declare bankruptcy. Before I helped create hundreds of jobs here in Connecticut, my husband and I had to declare bankruptcy, and we lost our home. The bankruptcy came as a result of our taking some few dollars that we had saved early on and investing in a couple of businesses that we didn't know anything about.
And so yeah, Linda's shot at the Senate in 2012 would play out almost exactly like her shot at the Senate in 2010. Putting a whole lot of time, effort, and money into losing to a Democratic challenger who never really had to take her that seriously in the first place. And so, following this critical defeat, Linda would once again for a time fade out of the political spotlight and, more broadly, the American public consciousness in general. And yet she was still far from done laying the groundwork for her own political legacy. But that's something we'll explore in the next chapter of our story. Now, like I said, Linda, even though she faded from public view at this point, was far from inactive. She just wasn't making as big of a public show about her political work as she had been. She was still out there taking low-level softball interviews, engaging in public altruism, and maintaining both her connections and clout with the broader conservative movement in the United States. Now, at the time, and at least from an outsider perspective, it really seemed like this might end up being a permanent kind of arrangement for Linda. While her business success, rags to riches story, and nigh bottomless personal war chest always made her something of a contender for higher office, her overall lack of charisma and exceedingly controversial past, well, they both seemed like just a permanent hindrance to any of those endeavors. And then 2016 happened. And all of a sudden, a renegade agent of pure conservative chaos named Donald Trump found his way into the White House. And suddenly everything changed for Linda. Because as you might recall, Donald Trump was already well acquainted and on great terms with the McMahon family. And in turn, you might also know that Donald Trump is very fond of hiring his unqualified friends for important roles in the government. Which is how in 2017, billionaire megacorp owner Linda McMahon found her way into the government job she had seemingly always wanted, when she was nominated as the Trump administration's new small business administrator. Now, on paper, this role kinda made sense. Linda had operated a business, which was at least at one point in her career something that could have been considered a small business, and furthermore she had overcome a reasonable amount of hardship on the road to massive financial success. And as such, she ended up passing through the confirmation process relatively smoothly. And in fact, at the time was seen as one of the more non-controversial and reasonable picks Trump made for his cabinet. Likewise, too, much of what Linda preoccupied herself with as the small business administrator was pretty standard, expected stuff. Republican-friendly talking points about cutting taxes and regulation.
The regulatory reform rollback really does help small businesses. It's not necessarily any particular reform or any particular regulation. It's just the stacks and piles of regulations that they have to comply with.
Defending Trump's policies in regards to how they affected small businesses specifically.
I happen to think and believe that that 15% top tax rate for subchapter S corporations and pass-through returns, I think that's the biggest stimulus for the middle class that there is going for us? What do you say?
This will be great news for them because, you know, they'll have more money in their pocket. They'll grow their business, they'll hire more people, and they're really looking forward to having the benefit of this tax cut.
And finding ways to promote and support American entrepreneurs, which is generally seen as a bipartisan issue.
Growing a company that then did become a global brand really gives you, I think, particular expertise in management, in how to then guide and navigate through the capital access landscape. Taking a company public was a very different thing, but I think there are small businesses today that really strive, you know, to go through some of those steps, and we'd like to help them. I'd like to help them live the American dream, which I was so fortunate to be able to do.
Likewise, and in a bit of sympathy for the devil here, her tenure as the Small Business Administrator did come with what are often considered to be a couple of high notes, including what was seen as a decently effective response to the needs of small businesses affected by Hurricane Harvey, and a move to modernize the department's online presence and capabilities. And yet, there was something else Linda McMahon brought to the Small Business Administration that I think is worth noting here. Namely, a stated goal of shrinking the department at large. Now, notably, this was a plan from the Obama administration all the way back in 2012 that Linda had just kind of supported and put her name to, and which itself seemed more focused on just eliminating redundancy and pulling together smaller departments and forces within the Small Business Administration. But all the same, I still think it's a bit of important foreshadowing for what's about to come. That all being said, though, Linda would actually end up resigning from this position in 2019, instead turning her eyes towards the party's future by taking over a Trump super PAC called America First Action, likely just meant to be a short-term fundraising gig, given the fact that the Republicans fully expected Donald Trump to win the 2020 election.
Linda McMahon has done an incredible job. As the head of the Small Business Administration, she has been a superstar. I've known her for a long time. I knew she was good, but I didn't know she was that good. She has been one of our all-time favorites. It was just so smooth. She's going to go and help us with a very, very important year and a half that we have coming up, and the re-election, as they call it.
And we are joined today by the chair of America First Action, Linda McMahon. Let's start with your group's big ad spend. What kind of traction are you starting to see from those ads?
The job of America First, our super PAC, is really to kind of fill in the gaps for the campaign or to give more weight in markets where the campaign is advertising. We can't coordinate with the campaign, but we can certainly see where they're making their buys. So all in total for this ad period, we have about $60 million so far in this campaign.
Unfortunately for them, and fortunately for our nation, though, Trump did not win that 2020 election, thanks to former President Joe Biden. Anyway, though, and interestingly enough, it seems like Linda herself, at least, was relatively undeterred by this minor setback, and in fact pounced on the opportunity presented by Trump's loss in 2020 to build for herself a more robust political opportunity in the future. In 2021, for example, Linda was named the chair of the board for the America First Policy Institute, or AFPI, and which I swear is a separate thing from America First Action that I mentioned just a bit ago. These Republicans just have like 3 names for everything.
I am Drew, I am Danny, and we are not the same person.
Likewise, though, the AFPI, unlike America First Action, was far from just a fundraising endeavor. Notably, the group initially started as a more informal collective of White House officials from Trump's first term, and which worked to try and develop a long-term, hyper-conservative policy strategy for Trump's second term. Initially dubbed Vision 2025, the plan was thrown a big curveball, though, when Trump lost and didn't immediately get said second term. Rather than toss their ugly baby out with the gross orange bathwater, though, the group simply decided to formalize themselves and begin preparations for their next opportunity to advance their message. Founded in 2021 by Brooke Rollins, the former director of the United States Domestic Policy Council during Trump's first term, the AFPI pulled together this otherwise somewhat disorganized conglomerate of conservative thinkers into basically a heritage foundation for the modern era. and by 2022 was often being described by folks in the know as a kind of quote-unquote White House in waiting, with a ridiculous number of potential cabinet members and advisors just sitting there waiting to be tapped by a new conservative administration. And at the top of all of this was board chair Linda McMahon.
I think what we have seen during administrations where it was not America first, our country declined.
It was time to create something new, and the America First Policy Institute was born.
To make America great again, you have no choice except to take on the left.
The mission of AFPI is absolutely to put America first every single day.
In the end, light will always defeat darkness.
This is the beginning of what we have to do to get America back on track.
We have to get this done for the American people. No was never an okay answer.
Never, ever quit.
It was always about building a machine for freedom for the next 100 years and beyond.
One of the things that I hear so often in our country now is that the American dream is dead. No.
Now, notably, Linda basically disappeared from the public eye almost entirely in the period from 2022 to late 2024. Although some of her disappearance from the public eye at that time was also probably related to the fact that her life was becoming, well, just the worst soap opera one could possibly imagine. For reference, in 2022, Vince was forced to resign from WWE in abject disgrace following the opening of an internal investigation into hush money payments and NDAs he allegedly enacted towards several women, accusing him of both sexual harassment and assault. And in 2024, that particular case exploded wide open with the filing of a civil suit by former WWE employee Janelle Grant, accusing Vince of some of legitimately the most vile, disturbing, immoral conduct one can possibly dream up. I'm not going to read anything from those lawsuit papers, by the way. They are, without a shadow of a doubt, the single most disturbing thing I have ever read in my time working for Fundy Fridays. And I encourage you all to only look those papers up and read them if your stomach is made of steel. But to give you an idea, Janelle Grant actually had to pause her own civil suit in early 2024 when, once the allegations she made had gone public and more people started coming forward, the Department of Justice decided to just open a full-scale criminal investigation into Vince's actions on charges related to both sexual abuse and trafficking. Furthermore, the September 2024 release of the popular Mr. McMahon docuseries on Netflix did not help either, drawing a bunch of eyes from outside the wrestling world towards, well, perhaps the worst human being in the entire history of professional wrestling, who also just so happened to be Linda's husband. And even as late as October of 2024, Linda herself was being dragged into the disgusting world of WWE's abuse scandals when she was named a direct defendant in a lawsuit pertaining to what is now colloquially known as the Ring Boy scandal. Now, the name probably gives you all a pretty good idea of where this goes, but suffice to say, it is charged by several plaintiffs that throughout the 1980s and seems like the 1990s, the WWE not only allowed several young boys, themselves often aspiring wrestlers just working under the table for the company, to be abused by high-level WWE staff. And that this abuse was then systematically covered up with a combination of hush money and intimidation for decades after. And yet, even through all of that, once Trump had been established as the Republican Party's presidential nominee for 2024, and as such the party's vision for that cycle had become fully clarified, well, Linda made sure to hinge her bets by practicing some of that ridiculous, overblown flattery that we all know Donald Trump loves so much, like we can see from her speech from that year's RNC.
President Trump is a job creator and the best friend American workers have ever had in the White House. He is a champion of the forgotten men and women, as I have experienced firsthand. But the media doesn't like to acknowledge that very often. Donald Trump is not only a fighter, ladies and gentlemen, he is a good man. He has the heart of a lion and the soul of a warrior. And I believe that if necessary, he would stand at the gates of hell to defend our country. He loves this country, and he would do anything to defend it and to protect us from all harm.
And it seems like, by all accounts, that type of stuff is how Linda was able to secure a coveted spot as a co-chair for Donald Trump's transition team as early as August 2024, just in case he won the election. And even in the middle of all that scandal we just talked about. And so, when Trump won the 2024 election, all of a sudden, Linda's position within the world of American politics improved dramatically and basically overnight at that. And yet even then, it seems like very few people expected what would happen next, when on November 19th of 2024, Trump announced Linda McMahon as his nominee for Secretary of Education. Now, even this monumental yet deeply concerning personal achievement for Linda couldn't escape the stink of her husband, Vince. When just a day after Trump's announcement, Linda was forced to publicly confirm that she and Vince had in fact been separated for quite some time, though nobody knows exactly how long it seems. And that's separated, mind you, not divorced, meaning that they are still technically married, meaning that should the two ever have to testify against each other in court, the scope of their ability to do so would be extremely limited, which is convenient to say the least. I don't know about you all, but I've watched The Sopranos, and I know how this stuff goes.
Oh my God, it's a simple question. Can they make me testify or not?
The short answer? Probably.
And yet, following this semi-disposal of her trash husband, it seems like Linda was ready to absolutely roar into this new life of hers. Independent enough from Vince at this point to try and fully carve out her own legacy as a political presence. Furthermore, while Linda was, by all accounts, seen as a confusing pick for Secretary of Education, she was far from the most concerning or controversial pick Trump made for his cabinet. Teaching organizations like the NEA would raise alarms about her complete lack of qualifications, but generally speaking, those complaints would go relatively unheard. Her confirmation hearings, unlike those of some of her fellow cabinet nominees, were relatively calm and friendly from what I could find.
Well, by the way, would you explain what a jag-off is?
I don't think I need to, sir.
Why not?
Because the men and women watching understand.
Well, perhaps some of my colleagues don't understand.
It would be a JAG officer who puts his or her own priorities in front of the warfighters. Their promotions, their medals, in front of having the backs of those who are making the tough calls on the front lines.
Thank you, Senator Reid. Interesting.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much.
I'm wondering, one of my very first important questions is it harder to sit composed and calm and focused among a bunch of WWE wrestlers, or is it harder to sit in this hearing with people popping up and yelling at you all the time?
I can stay pretty composed and focused in either environment.
And perhaps most important of all, the Democrats in Congress didn't have a way to stop Linda's placement in this role, even if they wanted to. Which is how, on March 3rd of 2025, Linda McMahon ended up being confirmed for her new role as Secretary of Education. So now you may be asking yourself, why? Why Linda? Like, okay, yeah, sure, we know Trump doesn't care about decency and he loves people who blow smoke up his ass. It's not even like she's the least qualified member of his cabinet. But seriously, what does she actually have to offer? Her lack of credentials for such a role was already dragged into the limelight back in 2009. And save for that 1 year on the Connecticut Board of Education, nothing really seems to have changed about her qualifications in that time. And that's not to mention the scandals. Like, was there no one with less baggage available for this highly consequential cabinet position? Even for somebody as detestable as Donald Trump? And yeah, it may be easy to write her off as just Betsy DeVos 2.0. Hell, I did in the beginning. They both, after all, made billions of dollars on the back of shady business dealings, and who have long touted ideas like school choice, charter schools, yada yada yada, you all know. And likewise, both of them seem primarily qualified for the role based on just how good they make Trump feel about himself. And the fact that the two are friends and allies of each other makes the comparison all the more accessible, right?
Former Secretary of Education in the first Trump administration, Betsy DeVos. What's your reaction to the appointment of Linda McMahon?
Well, I think it's a great appointment. Linda is a proven executive that has a ton of experience. She did a great job at SBA. She has a heart for kids and education. And we all know that the Department of Education is a mess. It has failed in its mission, and she will do a great job in implementing the policies that President Trump has championed, starting with education freedom, tax credit policy around school choice, and cleaning up and clarifying Title IX and this issue of men and women's bathrooms in women's sports. And then importantly, returning to the states and local communities power over decision making and resources to do the best thing for kids at the most local level, devolving it away from Washington and getting bureaucrats out of the mix.
But as I think we've demonstrated by now, it's really important to think about Linda's career more broadly. She is, if nothing else, a glad-hander and a fixer of the highest order, at least for those of extreme wealth and power. By all accounts, she spent years doing the absolute worst bidding that her husband and her company could have asked of her. Linda is exactly the type of person to have her greatest goal in life, a prominent position within the government, handed to her on a silver platter, only to then be tasked with destroying the entire thing she's been given at the whim of whoever put her in the role.
Why nominate Linda McMahon to be the Education Department Secretary if you're going to get rid of the Education Department?
Because I told Linda, I hope you do a great job and put yourself out of a job. I want her to put herself out of a job. Education Department.
And see, Republicans have wanted to eliminate the Department of Education for quite a while now. To give you all an idea, it was actually Jimmy Carter back in 1979 who worked primarily to elevate the Secretary of Education to a cabinet-level position.
We can have an America that has reconciled its economic needs with its desire for an environment that we can pass on with pride to the next generation. We can have an America that provides excellence in education to my child and your child and every child.
And by 1982, Ronald Reagan and the Republicans were already coming up with strategies on how to undo that change. And that pursuit has remained part of the Republican Party's overall zeitgeist ever since.
The budget plan I submit to you on February 8th will realize major savings by dismantling the Departments of Energy and Education. I propose, and would have already started, a planned and orderly transfer back to the states and local communities of functions the federal government has usurped and which it has proven it is incapable of operating. And one of the first of those would be welfare. One of the second would be in the field of education. I would like to dissolve the $10 billion National Department of Education created by President Carter and turn schools back to the local school districts where we built the greatest public school system the world has ever seen.
I mean, if we want to get real technical about it, the conservatives have been trying to get rid of the Department of Education since even before Carter elevated it to the cabinet, as we can see in this 1976 clip from Jen's most recent video subject, Phyllis Schlafly, where she advocates removing federal educational oversight from, at the time, what was called the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, for reasons that sound remarkably similar to the ones we hear today.
Many of the problems existing in the schools could be cured simply by the president telling the HEW department to stop trying to run our local schools. Don't let anyone tell you that it is a violation of the Constitution to have God and prayer in the schools.
Every one of the founding fathers was educated in a religious school that had daily prayer and strict moral training.
Now, eliminating the Department of Education hasn't always been a flagship issue for the Republicans like it is today. And often it's been considered a bit of a fringe position to suggest eliminating the department entirely. However, that position became more acceptable under the tenure of Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich in the 1990s.
In 1995, Speaker Gingrich, you were an advocate of dismantling the Department of Education.
Would I re-empower local school boards? Yes. Would I re-empower people to have a range of choice how to spend their money? I'd give every child a Pell Grant and allow every child and their parent to pick where to go.
Initially, resistance to the department's existence was born out of the Republicans' general goal of shrinking the federal government, and particularly to cut what they saw as unnecessary spending. And that is definitely still a big motivation for this type of action.
The United States spends more money on education than any other country in the world, and yet we get the worst outcomes. We're at the bottom of every list. In total, American society pours more than $1 trillion a year into public education systems. But instead of being at the top of the list, we are literally right smack, guess what, at the bottom.
But recently, the Republicans' concern over the Department of Education has shifted from a situation predominantly centered on financial concerns to now one predominantly centered on social and cultural concerns, with conservative parents generally believing that the department somehow injects quote-unquote woke ideology into their local school curriculums, despite there being absolutely no evidence or even procedures for them to actually do that.
Rather than indoctrinating young people with inappropriate racial, sexual, and political material, our schools must be totally refocused to prepare our children to succeed in the world of work and in life and the world of keeping our country strong. Right now, we're living in a failing nation because of Joe Biden and these people running it. They're Marxists, they're communists. What they're doing to our country is incredible, but we'll take care of that for our children. First, we will respect the right of parents to control the education of their children. Second, we will empower parents and local school board to hire and reward great principals and teachers, and also to fire the poor ones, the one whose performance is unsatisfactory. They will be fired. Like on The Apprentice, you're fired. Third, we will ensure our classrooms are focused not on political indoctrination, but on teaching the knowledge and skills needed to succeed, reading, writing, math, science, arithmetic, and other truly useful subjects. Fourth, we will teach students to love their country, not to hate their country like they're taught right now. Fifth, we will support bringing back prayer to our schools. Sixth, we will achieve schools that are safe, secure, and drug-free, with immediate expulsion for any student who harms a teacher or another student. Seventh, we will give all parents the right to choose another school for their children if they want. It's called school choice. And one other thing I'll be doing very early in the administration is closing up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and sending all education and education work and needs back to the states. We want them to run the education of our children.
So with all that in mind, it's also important for us to understand what the Department of Education actually does. And to that end, the department has, by its own website, 4 primary directives. I even made sure to look at a version of this page from the Biden administration, and besides changing the title, the Trump team have edited no other part of this document, so I think it's safe to assume that they agree with my interpretations here, at least in some regard. Now, first, the department is tasked with the disbursement of some federal education funding. Not a lot in the broad scheme of things, and actually a lot less than people usually seem to think they're in charge of. For reference, the Department of Education oversees the disbursement and usage of about 8% of all American K-12 public education funding, compared to 92% which comes from the local and state level and usually comes through local property taxes. That 8% of funding in turn primarily focuses on things that are often left out of localized education budgets. This is funding for programs like Title I preschool, GED classes, adult English as a second language classes, and other programs that just often don't end up being covered by all of the local funding. The Department of Education also takes a lead role in managing student loans and debt and funding related to higher education, as in colleges and universities, as in the thing that Trump and the other Republicans are actively blasting with constant cultural attacks and defunding threats as we speak. Starting to see what's going on here? But beyond the financial, the Department of Education is also tasked with conducting a significant portion of our country's research into educational policy and protocol, national testing policies, educational best practices, the kinds of unsung daily grunt work that keep our country's education system from stagnating. And from what I've seen, this is a spot where a lot of confusion tends to get introduced into the process, since conservatives oftentimes consider this type of thing to be curriculum control. But more often than not, it just involves testing, performance analysis, progress reviews, and benchmarks. And it has nothing to do with telling local communities to, I don't know, put more woke genders into the math books or whatever they think it is. That being said, the Department of Education is also responsible for enforcing federal civil rights laws as they pertain to American education, particularly noting on its own website that this includes people like homeless children with disabilities, individuals with limited English proficiency, women and girls in athletic programs, and people in need of vocational rehabilitation. So in other words, the Department of Education is in charge of enforcing diversity, equity, and inclusion in American schools. Oh, and they also maintain the authority to do so over the authority of state agencies, local school systems, and literally anyone else who gets federal education funding. Seriously, are you starting to see where this is going yet? Lastly, and most broadly though, the department tasks itself with drawing national attention to problems and areas of need within the American education system at large. The Secretary of Education, in particular, directly advises the President on educational policy, coordinates with a broad number of educational organizations and agencies, and promotes proper policy through speeches, conferences, and other means of messaging the public. And all of that is now in the hands of Linda freaking McMahon.
The Department of Education today told staffers to vacate their offices by 6 p.m. because the offices were closing nationwide. Workers aren't going to be allowed back into the buildings until at least Thursday. Nearly half of the 4,100 workers are being cut. Now, is this the first step on the road to a total shutdown?
Yes, actually it is, because that was the president's mandate, this directive to me. But what we did today was to take the first step of eliminating what I think is bureaucratic bloat. And that's not to say that a lot of the folks, it's a humanitarian thing too. A lot of the folks that are there, they're out of a job.
So the criteria for keeping that 50% is related to expenditures and key programs?
Correct. Like Congress appropriates the money that is going through Title I to IDEA programs.
What's that stand for?
Do you know what? I'm not sure I can tell you exactly what it stands for, except that it's the Programs for Disabled and Needs.
Individuals with Disabilities Act, I think. Yeah.
Come on! You can't just not know this shit!
I don't think I need to ask. I think we all see where this is going. At least in my opinion, Trump and the other Republicans are looking to do what Republicans have been looking to do for decades now. Put more money into their pockets and the pockets of their billionaire benefactors. Lowering taxes, cutting agencies, removing regulations, and privatizing schools and other educational institutions for potentially massive profit. And in order to do all of that, they're going to do what they always do. Siphon as many dollars away as they possibly can from the country's most vulnerable, from the American middle class, from basically anybody who's not in their little billionaire club. Oh, and by the way, cutting the Department of Education to save federal dollars is like deleting Word documents from your hard drive to open up more space. Really, really ineffective. For reference, the Department of Education accounts for about 4% of all federal spending, or about $270 billion last year. For reference, though, the Department of Defense spends more than 4 times that amount per year and has spent over $2 trillion American dollars developing one single style of fighter jet. I don't know about you all, but I'd rather we spend that money on things like textbooks and free meals for American students. But I suppose you can't use those types of things to commit war crimes, so obviously that's a no-go. So yeah, how are Trump and the Republicans going to get people on board with this kind of stuff when in the past, the party has struggled to do so? Just simple misdirection. Don't think about vulnerable folks in your community who will lose the funding and regulations that have made it possible for them to get an education. Kindergarten teachers are using critical race theory to teach your children that white people are devil worshippers. Don't think about how we need broad, top-down educational research and reform on a near constant basis in order to stay competitive with the rest of the world. The furries are pooping in litter boxes at your local high school. Don't think about how private student lenders will be able to basically crank up interest rates and fees on American students at will, thereby setting back an entire generation financially, and taking us even further away from the grand dream of free higher education for all. Government thought police are beating up Christian homeschooled parents and forcing their kids into gay school or something, I don't know. And then the MAGA crowd eats all of this nonsense up, and in the process, signs the death warrant for American education without even realizing they've done it. And so, it should come as no surprise to any of you that in her 2-ish or so months at time of recording of being the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon has done nothing but push the worst ideology imaginable, actively embarrass and undermine her own agency at every turn, and facilitate the death of an important national institution. Let's look at the highlights, shall we? So far, she's managed to pointlessly interrupt a press conference of Democrats looking for answers to spout off a bunch of her own nonsense straight out of the Republican education playbook.
So they are de facto restructuring this entity along a corporate model without a plan and without an effort to really protect our students. We are extraordinarily grateful to the Secretary that she joined us. Thank you. She's here. Perhaps I should give her the podium. But with all due respect, Madam, I think my biggest concern is that the states will not be able to protect the programs and services that you would like to devolve with them.
This is not a partisan issue. This is about the children of America. If we want to have that next group of engineers and doctors and lawyers and plumbers and electricians and HVAC operators, then we need to focus on how they can best have their education. Just wanted to come out and have.
While you're here, can you just answer the question? When are you going to shut down this building?
Well, we've had our discussions already, so thank you all very, very much for coming.
You wanted to get the message out by yourself. Could you walk us through what happened when you went over there to those Democratic lawmakers?
It was really supposed to be an off-the-record meeting, and then I discovered that they were having a press conference, outside, right on the education property. So I just said, well, I think I'll just go down and join and make sure that everyone has both sides of the story.
Likewise, Secretary McMahon also managed to send a buzzword-laden attack letter to the leadership of Harvard University, threatening their funding over a bunch of made-up conservative fear-mongering that is really just a poorly disguised attempt to limit their ability to teach. And while I'm not sure if it was anyone at Harvard specifically who took the time to sit down and grade Linda's letter like the D- freshman quality rough draft it was, I really don't care because it still makes me giggle.
I want to just understand from your perspective how much you think the decision around Harvard is directly around anti-Semitism versus what the president has said on Truth Social, which is about his concerns around ideology as it relates to politics.
The president made it incredibly clear when he was campaigning that he was not going to stand by and watch the attacks of anti-Semitism that were going on in some of the elite colleges around the country, especially Columbia and Harvard and others. And so when the Department of Education started looking into this, and I made it very clear, I said, these are not First Amendment infractions. This is civil rights. This is making sure that students on all campuses can come and learn and be safe.
Oh, for sure, Linda. You're definitely taking time to make sure that every American college student is safe. Or at least the ones you don't arrest and detain for protesting Israeli war crimes.
You're going to be under arrest. So turn around.
Okay, let's not. Okay, he's not resisting. He's giving me his phone, okay? He's not, I understand. He's not resisting.
There's no need for this. Don't worry about it. You're going to have to come with us. Don't worry. I'm coming with you. Don't worry. No one's resisting. No one's getting worked up.
You guys really don't need to be doing all of that.
It's fine.
حبيبي كيف بدي اتصل فيك؟
Take Amy. Call Amy.
Okay. Hi, Amy. Yeah, they just handcuffed him and took him. I don't know what to do.
Everyone else, though, totally safe. Oh, and something I have to mention in editing because it actually happened between the period when my last video was taken down and when this version was uploaded. Linda once again demonstrated her complete lack of qualification and knowledge towards this role during her recent testimony at the House Education and Workforce Committee in regards to whether or not Holocaust education and Black history education counted as DEI programs.
I'm going to ask you two really quick questions. Do you think that Holocaust education in our schools is a DEI program? There's no card for that. That's just yes or no.
I can look at it, whatever card.
Holocaust education, is it a DEI? You can have a press conference to say whatever you want. I just need a quick answer to this.
Your soliloquy
is Holocaust, because this is my time, is Holocaust education a DEI program?
No.
Is African American Studies a DEI program?
I think I answered that with one.
I'm asking it again.
Listen, we should
just yes or no.
We should be able to teach courses.
My point is they are DEI programs, both of them, because students need diversity, equity, and inclusion to understand their environments. So both Holocaust education and the teaching of African American history are important, which is why the state of Connecticut requires it in our social studies curriculum. You're talking out of both sides of your mouth. You can't support one without supporting the other.
You can't just not know this shit.
Oh, but Linda does at least know one thing about her job, and it's that all you mooching broke student loan holders, you need to start paying your bills.
In case you missed it, the Department of Education announced that on May 5th, we will restart collections of student loans in default. The federal student loan portfolio stands at nearly $1.7 trillion, and only 4 in 10 student borrowers are in repayment. Unlike the previous administration, who made false promises and pushed an illegal student loan bailout, we will not force American taxpayers to take on the debts that are not theirs. There's no such thing as forgiveness, just shifting the payment burden from one party to another. Borrowers should pay back the debts they take on.
Oh, borrowers should repay what they owe. See, I'm just curious, Linda, as to where that energy was back in the 70s when you declared bankruptcy, or in the late 2000s when we all realized that you hadn't paid back those debts from that bankruptcy. Or what about just recently when we found out your company is $3 billion in debt off a bad merger you never should have followed through with? But yeah, by all means, it's all of the people out there with student loans that are tanking our economy. Respectfully, shut the hell up, brokey.
Borrowers should pay back the debts they take on.
Brokey, yeah. But on a lighter note, at least it seems like Linda is getting out there and tackling our nation's issues on the educational conference circuit, as is one of her primary duties. Although she may want to educate herself a bit more about all of this conversation surrounding artificial intelligence, that's AI for short, before talking about it on any stages anytime soon.
I just want to get the best results so that we can fine-tune best practices that we are offering to our states and the tools that we want to help them have. I wish that I could give you the blueprint of what the best technology answer would be for that, but I don't have that. I think it was a letter or a report that I heard this morning, I wish I could remember the source, but that there is a school system that's going to start making sure that first graders or even pre-Ks have A1 teaching, every year starting, that far down in the grades. And that's a wonderful thing. Kids are sponges. They just absorb everything. And so it wasn't all that long ago that we're going to have internet in our schools. Woo! Now, okay, let's see A1 and how can that be helpful?
You can't just not know this shit.
I mean, is it a semi-understandable mistake that, while she definitely should have known better, was fundamentally harmless and easy to understand? Yeah. Am I going to laugh about it and mock her anyway because she's an awful person who accidentally just laid bare for all of us her woeful lack of qualifications for the job she has? You bet your ass I am. And to wrap up exactly why I feel that way about Linda McMahon, let's move on to my final thoughts and the conclusion of this episode. All right, everyone. It's time for me to make like former WWE champion Cody Rhodes and finish the story, so to speak. And I will start off this last chapter of our story by saying that Linda McMahon is little more than, and above all else, a spineless, sycophantic stooge. Despite all of her accomplishments, she consistently allows her own legacy to be fully tainted by gross, domineering men who hand her terrible circumstances to work with and expect her to perform those duties with a smile, which she does happily and, in my opinion, quite pathetically. Just a patsy through and through. Once again, quoting Cody Rhodes, Linda is just the product of a man in an office somewhere that we don't talk about anymore. Except now, she's got a new man, it would seem, and her newest man is someone that we are forced to keep talking about. See, while no one is too eager anymore to discuss Vince McMahon, and in turn almost everyone is more than happy to see him out of the limelight, Donald Trump is the freaking president. He's unfortunately far too powerful and far too dangerous for us to stop talking about, especially when he's just 6 months or so into his term and already deploying the US military against US citizens. Let's all take a moment to send our love to Los Angeles right now as well too for not putting up with his BS in that regard, but still. See though, unlike most of the wrestlers in her locker room, Linda knew about all of the terrible things going on in Vince's office. She signed off on them, she helped cover them up, and she has no alibi for why any of this was allowed to take place under her watch. And I want to make it clear, I still love professional wrestling. I still love professional wrestlers. And honestly, I love the memories that the wrestlers of WWE have given me through all of these years. Because honestly, the McMahon family has never made the art nor the business of professional wrestling any better. In fact, I would argue that the business is great in spite of them, and certainly not because of them in any capacity whatsoever. The wrestlers are the ones who made all of my childhood memories. Their athleticism, their charisma, their raw talent, and the incredible risks they took with their bodies for the sake of entertaining an audience. That's what the wrestling memories of my childhood are truly made of. Not some McMahon-concocted schlock about how depraved and disgusting their family is. The McMahons and the WWE made wrestling bigger. Sure. I can't deny them their victory in regards to sheer size when it comes to a wrestling brand. They have been the singular global leader in creating professional wrestling content for effectively 4 straight decades at this point. Although if you want to hear more about the 2-year period in the 90s where they randomly weren't the biggest wrestling brand in the world, check out my video covering Hulk Hogan. And hey, if you have the time, watch it before they copyright claim it. And you know what? Since I have just a little bit of reason to believe that Linda might actually see this, why don't we go ahead and address Linda directly, shall we? Sure, Linda, you made a $1 billion fortune off of all these endeavors. Still can't seem to keep yourself or your company out of massive debts any better than you could in the 70s, but you know, it's all impressive nonetheless. And it's not like you were a bit player in all of this either. The TV contracts were your idea. It seems like the lion's share of WWE's altruistic efforts were probably your idea too, no matter how performative they all may have been. And you even started an entire industry of wrestling toys. Legitimate accomplishments all, and I am nothing if not fair to my opponent. But ask yourself, Linda, at what cost? Dozens of young, talented performers gone far too soon, off the back of drug abuse, grueling tour schedules, and hyper-violent wrestling performed primarily for the financial benefit of you and your family. An industry plagued with normalized labor exploitation and wage theft. One which, in the year of our freaking Lord 2025, still allows your company to avoid paying for such basic things as health insurance and retirement plans for the professional athletes under your employ. And yes, Linda, I said under your employ because I'm not playing along with your independent contractor nonsense. And no, you're not getting credit for providing healthcare when they get injured in the ring. Because even beyond the fact that it's the literal least you could do, we all know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of repair. And regular doctor's visits with a healthy schedule away from the wrestling ring would likely prevent many of those injuries. But who cares when you can just grind them all into a paste for a quick buck? And all of that isn't even to mention that you and your company maintain legitimately one of the worst track records of abuse, deceit, and cruelty towards its staff and its performers. And personally, in this situation, I mean one of the worst track records in all of human history. As much as the WWE can be described as a massively successful business, or even as a central part of so many childhoods like mine, it also can just as easily be described as an unethical, maniacal reign of terror, played out on the scale of a gigantic global megacorporation. We know now beyond effectively all reasonable doubt, at least as far as I'm concerned, that you let your gross husband subject all of us, wrestlers, staff, and viewers of your product alike, to his abhorrent perversions for a period of several straight years, and much longer if we really want to hit the scope of this whole thing. And Linda, you must realize that you had the power to stop all of it, and you didn't. You chose not to. Over and over again, you made that choice. For all of the money, for all of the success, for all of the very real power you held, your personal legacy, your good name will go down in history tarnished deeply and inescapably by a husband you had 100 chances to stop. The sheer volume of people exploited in your family's name, and the grotesque, violent trauma inflicted upon so many of them under your watch is truly astounding. I wouldn't trust you to manage a Dairy Queen, let alone a global wrestling empire or, God forbid, a cabinet-level position. You talk about how you built an empire, about all those jobs you created, about how you supposedly tamed the world of professional wrestling to make your fortune. You want to talk about your Austin 3:16? Well, James 3:16 says, where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every foul practice. No, seriously, that is the literal James 3:16, straight from the Bible. Quite prophetic in this context, don't you think? And yet, here you are in charge of educating our nation's children. Not just sitting in the cabinet, but Secretary of Education. That's no small-time climb-the-ladder job like head of the Small Business Administration, but instead a deeply important, prominent position of power. And yet somehow, once again, you manage to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Playing the fool yet again for another brash bag of hot gas, promising to keep you entertained at your own expense, as long as you blindly follow his lead and rubber stamp his complete lack of ethics and morals without question. A routine you seem to fall just face over heels for every single time. It's a joke, and you're the butt of it, Linda. You know that as well as I do. You're not a serious pick for Secretary of Education, and you never were. Your particular ass being the one to sit in that deeply important chair is designed to mock the very department you've been put in charge of, because we all know, good and well, it's impossible to take you seriously in that role. What, your 50-year-old French degree and your 1 year on the Connecticut Board of Education, that qualifies you for the highest educational position in the land? But that doesn't matter, does it? Because all you've really been hired to do is push down the plunger and blow up the building. A task basically anyone could do. Your decades-long trail of poor performance, labor exploitation, and abuse enablement, all fine for someone who's here simply to destroy and not to actually lead. That's why they don't care that you're screwing up the job already in such profound ways. You say that you're only 5 days into the job and that's why you don't know anything. But I know that there are hundreds more qualified people in this country who already knew all of those things you didn't know. And I'd prefer basically any one of them to be sitting in that chair over you. I didn't like you when you were running all those wrestlers, from the favorites of my youth to the modern marvels of today, through a meat grinder of bad benefits, low pay, high professional restriction, and constant workplace abuse. And I sure as hell don't like you now that you're Trump 2's Secretary of Education, gleefully making like your son-in-law and taking a sledgehammer to this noble and important American institution, simply for the crime of working to secure the pursuit of happiness for so many disenfranchised Americans that you don't give a damn about. I'd sooner spit in your eye than shake your hand, Linda. You sent my childhood heroes to early graves. And now you're trying to take away from thousands upon thousands of American students the time-honored tradition of a high-quality, tax-funded public education, the kind that shaped me into the person I am today, the kind of education that gave me all the tools and skills I needed to research all of this information about you, and not even to mention the ones I needed to script and edit this video. Public school is very important to me, and I don't take kindly to it being stripped away from the next generation of Americans. But somehow this goes so much deeper even than that, with so many more people just being caught in the crossfire of this whole thing. Our country's youngest and poorest learners, immigrants looking to assimilate through the English language like all of you Republicans say they have to. College students looking to freely exercise their right to free speech. Queer students and students of color crying out for the protection of their civil rights. All of those people will suffer under a Linda McMahon regime at the Department of Education. And in turn, your planned actions will go a long way towards advancing the cause of evangelical homeschoolers, greedy fiscal conservatives, for-profit private school grifters, and awful right-wing bullies looking to use the American educational system as a means to further disenfranchise and marginalize our country's most vulnerable populations.
Every argument you have is to put local control back into the states, but states already have local control, as anyone who has any knowledge or background of education would already know. The role of the Department of Education would be the civil rights enforcement of those local controls, which again, the irony of this budget zeroing out American history and civic education programs when you couldn't even answer a question about Ruby Bridges or the election of President Biden, which are as basic as it gets. When you respond to questions from my colleagues by saying that sounds like an issue for state legislatures, that is why the Office of Civil Rights is necessary, because state legislatures made the decision that Ruby Bridges did not have the right to a free and appropriate high-quality public education. So you, Madam Secretary, are actually making the argument for the role of the department, not to dictate local curriculum instruction or instructional materials, but to make sure that those things are carried out by the department. I mean, that states follow the law, that they are doing those things. 49 million children in this country receive public education services. About 3 million children are in charter schools. There are not enough charter school slots. So my questions are mainly focused on what about those other 46 million children? When you come in and say your final mission is to eliminate the department, it says to me that the 46 million children that are not receiving services do not matter.
Rest assured, Linda, you're very likely to go down as the worst Secretary of Education in history. The one who finally took down an important pillar of our government in the name of Christian nationalist homeschool parents who want to reserve the right to hit their children for falling asleep during Bible study, along with a small collective of American billionaires looking to siphon just a little bit more money into their fat, greedy pockets. I truly believe that you'll go down as the first Secretary of Education in American history that wanted American students to think less critically, to be less informed of their rights, and honestly, to be less educated than they ever have been before. And the great, terrible irony of it all is it never had to, nor does it have to, be this way. You had power, real power, throughout your entire life. You had the power to push back on your husband, Vince. to protect all of those wrestlers from exploitation and chronic pain, and to compensate them properly for their work, to protect all of those men, women, and young people victimized in the most heinous and degrading ways imaginable by the men in your inner circle. But you chose not to. Likewise, Linda, you have power now. You could just as easily spend your days in office actually learning about American educational policy and practice, building plans to expand the system to as many Americans as possible, and actually utilizing your immense power for good for once. But yet again, you're choosing not to. And for those reasons, you are a disgrace, a mockery, a bad joke once told at the expense of talented wrestlers and naive fans, now instead being told at the expense of so many learners, educators, and children all across the United States. It's disgusting, and you're disgusting for participating in it, Linda. And I know when it comes to Linda McMahon, I'm just a tiny fly on a giant horse's ass. One angry middle-aged man with a camera. You're a billionaire backed by a big, nasty corporation and an even bigger, nastier government, with every tool of censorship at your disposal. I can't do much beyond complain on the internet, where you can literally take my work offline in a matter of hours, claiming a bunch of pointless, old, low-res footage clearly being utilized in an educational capacity to help people understand this terrible person currently running the American Department of Education. And you can do it all knowing that I have very little recourse to truly fight back. And all of that's not to mention making it much harder for anyone to expose you by simply taking away all the evidence and claiming you own it. But the thing is, I can at least complain poetically. I can help American citizens trim away at all the drudgery it takes to look into your life. And I can make the absolute worst of it all known. And I can tell everyone exactly how awful you are, down to your core. Vince was right. You are demon-infested, Linda. But they're not in your womb like he so misogynistically said. Oh no. Instead, those demons live inside your very soul. And since you've tried to destroy not one, but two of the things I hold dearest in this world, I'm going to make it my mission to expose as much of your dirty laundry, as loudly as I can, as much as I can, for as long as I am physically able to do so. And maybe, just maybe, this little horsefly can bite hard enough that the big horse kicks the fence and breaks their leg. Already got under your skin a little bit, I know. 21 manual copyright claims confirm that to me good and well. So to all the viewers of this video, I hope I've done my job and made you all aware of the terrible human being running our Department of Education into the ground. Like G.I. Joe said, knowing is half the battle. And now you can even go out and teach your friends, your family, and your neighbors about how much Linda McMahon sucks and is bad at her job. Talk about sending education back to the local level, am I right? And in the end, as simply as I can, let me wrap this up by stealing just one more line out of Cody Rhodes' book. Go fuck yourself, Linda. Whew! Another one down, another one of my biggest episodes to date. If you've made it this far, as always, thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. I don't even know how you'll do it sometimes, but dear Lord, I love that you do, and I love making them. This one was tough. I've been recording for 4.5 hours at a straight stretch now, and I'm tired. I gotta go make some food and spend time with the Reverend. But before I go, in the meantime, I want to say a few things. If you like what we do on this channel, please take a moment and consider giving a little bit of money to our Patreon. I know money's tight and getting tighter, but if you manage to find a little bit of coin burning a hole in your pocket, it's just $3 or even as low as $1 to subscribe to our Patreon or to our YouTube memberships, and it gets you all kinds of cool stuff. Access to our Discord, over 5,000 Genonites strong, some of the coolest people you'll ever meet, talking about the coolest stuff you'll ever meet. It gets you access to our Discord watch parties. We watch everything from the Righteous Gemstones to documentaries about religious movements to Duggar episodes to sometimes even just Monday Night Raw, and it is a hoot, and it's a great place to chat with me and the Reverend and all your favorite Jennonites. Likewise, you get access to some behind-the-scenes content and some special patron-only videos, and if nothing else, it's the lifeblood of this channel, and if you like what we do, I want you to know that those patrons are the people who keep it afloat for everybody. They keep it free for everybody else. And if you don't like joining groups, that's fine. I would encourage you to please also check out fundyfridays.shop. We've got some incredibly cool merch there, including our most recent poster, The Attack of the Jezebel Spirit. And I'm so excited to announce the debut of our brand new Fundy Fridays Pride collection, including our Pride Month Demon, our militant homosexual ball cap, our all-new pin pack with 5 of your favorite Fundy Fridays designs, and for the first time ever, the highly requested Thank You Michelle design, available on mugs, t-shirts, stickers, any way you want it. All this and so much more available right now at fundyfridays.shop. And if you don't have any extra money to spend, that will always be fine, and I want you to know that. Your viewership is enough. If you feel it in you, please take a moment and hit that subscribe button, maybe even that little bell, so that, you can see our stuff as soon as it comes out. And in the meantime, we're going to try and keep putting these out for you, because it's now more important than ever to talk about morality, politics, and religion, and they're not going to stop us. And otherwise, in the meantime, if you have nothing else to offer, just know your viewership tonight was more than enough, and I love you for it. Good night, good evening, whatever time it is. I hope you have an incredible weekend whenever your next weekend is. Do something kick-ass over the weekend. Do something educational. Go to the library, read a book or something. Donate some money to write off some student lunch debt in your community. I don't know, but do something kick-ass. And in the meantime, I love you all. Thank you all. Good night.